Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell.
The children in the village used to tease little Lisa about being a frog. The girl had black, shiny eyes, red hair braided into two tight pigtails that made her head seem perfectly round. She had a big red mouth and freckles all over her face. And Lisa wore a green jumpsuit, which she loved. That was enough to get her a hurtful nickname. At first, the girl tried to fight with her abusers, but since they were mostly boys, the fights were lost in advance. Lisa Wendy's mom was upset every time she saw her daughter coming back after children's games. Not in the best condition. Hair was on the green overalls, holes on the palms of her hands, abrasions. Wendy spoke to her daughter, asking her not to mess with the boys. "They're stronger than you," she screamed in frustration. "Why are you fighting with them?" "I don't want to be called a frog," replied the daughter. After a while, the mother realized she needed to change tactics after another fight with her daughter, when she came back with a black eye and her pant leg almost torn off. Wendy said, "And why, exactly, do you resent them?" Close looked at her mom in surprise. "I mean, she knows perfectly well what the reason for the fight is." "Why?" she asks. "Have you forgotten? The boys call me a frog, Mom." Wendy raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Are frogs bad?" Did Lisa open her mouth? "Probably not." Carefully, she said, "But they're not pretty, are they?" Lisa couldn't tell if her mother was being serious or joking. "Well, they're green and wet and quacky." Wendy pretended to think about it. "I think green is a very pretty color. It's the color of grass leaves. And the fact that the frog is wet makes sense. It lives near water and swims a lot. So there's a third frog. That's what my daughter said. A duck poops, a cow moo, a frog quacks. What's wrong?" Close thought about it. For some reason, she couldn't think of what was offensive about it. "It turns out, finally," said the girl, "that there is nothing offensive in the word frog." "It turns out so. But they will still be called names. Except it doesn't start when they call you a frog, but when you take it as an insult." Lisa sighed and climbed into her mother's lap. Wendy smiled and hugged her daughter. "Mommy," said the little girl, "how smart are you?" "I think you know everything about everything in the world." Wendy sighed. If only, daughter, if only. Wendy was born far away from Jenna, from her hometown of Boston. It was almost 2 days by train to this village, and not to the village itself, but only to the station. From the station, it was another 5 kilometers on a broken dirt road. When Wendy was a child, she had never imagined that she would ever move so far from home. Her parents were well-to-do and generally cultured people. Daddy lectured to future economists. Mom worked as a saleswoman in a boutique, an expensive clothing store. Wendy was their only daughter, a welcome late-born child. Even before she was born, Mom and Dad planned the girl's future. What kind of kindergarten would she go to? What kind of school would she attend? That she would additionally practice swimming and chess. That she would enter the University of Arts. The girl grew up as a princess, neat, obedient, affectionate. Her parents could not be pleased with her and did not notice that under the calmness and gentleness hides a steely character. Perhaps Wendy herself did not know that she had an indomitable will. It appeared by chance when Wendy was a sophomore in high school. She was offered to go on tour with the student theater in the summer. Wendy accepted. It was a great opportunity to get some practice, earn a little money, and see a lot of beautiful places. Mostly they traveled to small villages and hamlets, where they had almost no entertainment. Students performed more often in the open air. And if they were lucky, then in schools, kindergartens, and libraries. The farthest point in their tour was Light Long Their Critters, and saw Sebastian, local teacher. It was love at first sight, despite the fact that they spent together only one evening after the performance, when the teacher invited the young actress to walk along the riverbank. The young people decided that they no longer wanted to part. But parting had to be done. Wendy and the theater went home. Sebastian stayed in the village for another month. After that, they corresponded. Then Sebastian went to Boston to ask for his sweetheart's hand in marriage. His parents were against it. "What wedding?" yelled Wendy at her mom. "You're only 19, and where will you live?" added her father. "I I have my own house, replied Sebastian, but continued shouting at Mom in the village. Mom, Dad entered the conversation already. Wendy, I agree to move. You've never lived in the village. So, have you adapted? What about school? I'll finish it by correspondence. They couldn't come to an agreement. The parents were adamant. Let's end this argument, Dad said. Either you stay here with us and forget about your village nonsense and love, or you are no longer our daughter. Wendy pressed her lips together and nodded. I hear you. She took Sebastian by the arm, leading him to her room. There she quickly packed her suitcase and held it out to her teacher. Are you sure? He asked softly. I'm sure, Wendy replied. They were married as soon as they arrived in Sebastian's homeland. Before that, Wendy had met her future mother-in-law, Anna. They liked each other immediately. Anna is very soft and affectionate. The woman also worked as a teacher, just like her son. Despite the fact that Wendy was a city dweller, she got used to the village quickly. She liked the quiet, unhurried life that her husband and Anna had here. Wendy learned to stoke the stove, plant a vegetable garden, pick mushrooms and berries. Of course, all the hard work her husband took on the job. Wendy took a job as a librarian. She enjoyed spending time surrounded by books. She also started a theater group for children. A year later, Lisa was born to Wendy and Sebastian. The young parents couldn't get enough of their daughter. Now their family was a real, full cup. It seemed that nothing could mar their happiness. But it didn't last long. When Lisa was 3 years old, Sebastian died. He went fishing in early spring, fell through the ice and drowned. If it hadn't been for Anna, Wendy wouldn't have survived the loss. She grieved for her husband so much that she even seemed to forget about her little daughter. Lisa barely remembers this time. She has one vague memory of her father, of him laughing, taking her in his arms and spinning her around with him. Her father has freckles on his cheeks, blue eyes, and light red hair. Lisa had little memory of his death. At the time, she just didn't understand why she was always cheerful and smiling. Her mom now lay on the couch all day long and was silent and hardly spoke at all. During that period, Anna practically lived, took care of her granddaughter, made her daughter-in-law eat, drink, wash her face. After a month, she got tired of waiting for Wendy to come to her senses, sent Lisa out for a walk, the neighbor kids, and started the conversation enough, Wendy. Sebastian is dead, and there's nothing you can do about it. Think of your daughter. Is it her fault what happened? Imagine what it's like for her to live without her mother. I understand, Anna replied weakly, but I can't help it. What would Sebastian say? The mother-in-law continued. I think he would want you to go on with your life, to bring up your daughter. If you died and he lived, what would he do? Tears rolled down Wendy's face. He wouldn't be lying in bed, she said quietly. He would have lived, worked, taken care of his daughter. She sobbed. Anna hugged her tightly around the shoulders and cried too. The women sat like that for an hour. After that, Wendy began to return to life. Of course, without her beloved husband, life had lost all its colors. What did she have? Only her daughter kept her alive. Wendy went back to work, started to work hard on the household. It was hard without a man in the house, but she coped with Anna, helping each other. That's how they lived their little female family. Varvara liked living in the Light Wolf. Even after the death of her husband, she did not consider the option of returning to her parents in Boston. She still remembered their harsh words about ceasing to be their daughter if she left. Of course, while Lisa was growing up, Wendy often thought about the fact that a daughter had a right to know that she had grandparents besides Anna. She'd even tried writing a letter to her parents a few times, but each time she'd torn the sheets into small pieces and thrown them in the oven. All right, she reassured herself. Lisa will grow up, I will tell her everything, and then let her decide for herself whether she wants to communicate with them. But as much as she disliked Jenna herself, sometimes Wendy wondered where it would be better for her daughter to live. She brought it up in a conversation with Lisa. Do you like it here? Wendy asked. Her daughter raised her eyebrows in surprise. We're here in our house. The mother smiled uncertainly at both the house and the village. Carefully, she pronounced, I keep thinking about your future. You're about to finish school and you'll have to go to university. Have you thought about where you want to go? The daughter shrugged her shoulders. Not yet. I'll decide later. But I don't want to leave. I'd like to stay with you and Grandma. Wendy sat closer and hugged her daughter. Grandma and I would like you to be with us too. But it's not possible. There's nothing to do in our village. You have to think about the future. Lisa frowned. You've lived here all your life. My dad lived here and my grandmother. All right, they're local. But you could have come back at any time, but you stayed because of your dad's memory. And that's why Wendy didn't mind either. But there were other reasons. I like how nice and quiet it is here. This pace of life suits me, and I don't want to move any closer to my mother. She loved these moments when they sat on the porch and hugged and talked about something personal. Mom. Cautiously, she began a conversation she had been thinking about for a long time, but had never dared to have. You're not old, thank you, Mom said with a smile. Are you glad you think so? Lescott continued. You could get married again, get out of here, start a new life, maybe even have more children. Wendy looked at her with surprise. Lisa blushed, but she had put off this conversation for too long. Mom, I'm serious. I think you didn't do it because you raised me. Also in memory of Dad, and because you were afraid I wouldn't understand it. Lisa interrupted her mother with embarrassment. Thank you for your words. I'm glad you care about me. But believe me, I'm quite happy if I ever meet the man I'm going to love. That would be wonderful. But I think I'm still in love with your father. Lisa was graduating from high school this year, and senior year was exciting and hopeful for her and her classmates. Like all 17-year-olds, it seemed to them that childhood was about to end, and real adulthood was about to begin. What exams have you chosen? Asked Lisa Cindy, her best friend. She wasn't going to continue her studies herself. She decided to stay in the village. Irina Mama was the owner of the best store in the village, and her daughter was going to start as a sales clerk and then, after learning everything from the inside, to work on an equal footing with her mother. In addition to Russian and math, I will pass literature, social studies, and history, Lisa replied. You've made up your mind. Where are you going to enter? The friend shrugged her shoulders. I'll think about it in the summer after the exams. Cindy stretched dreamily. My mother said that I can rest until September, and then every day in the store. The face of the friend is upset, pulled out, and then you will go away to study and general boredom will be. But we have the summer. Let's make it unforgettable. Lisa laughed. She was a pretty calm person. Her friend, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. Lisa Cindy noticed the doubt on her face. Don't be so absent-minded. Let yourself relax a little. Nothing's going to happen in one summer. Okay, Lisa sighed. They passed their exams quite well. The graduation party at their small school was simple, no frills, but very sincere and cozy. Now the real summer begins, said Cindy. We'll start going out tomorrow. I was a bit uncertain, said Lisa. You'll like it. Did the young people in their village have a lot of fun? Of course, Lisa used to take part in them, but not so often. The evening would start with Lisa visiting a friend. She would sit listening to music, putting on makeup and going through outfits. So Cindy said grudgingly, What kind of look is that? What's the matter? Do you look like a nerd? Lisa took offense. Okay, peacefully said her friend. But I'm sorry. You look like you're going to school, not a party. After these words, she walked resolutely over to her friend, unraveled her tightly braided pigtails. Red curls scattered over her shoulders. You have the most beautiful hair. Of all the girls I know, Cindy said. You bet I do. Lisa was embarrassed. I was always teased about it when I was a kid. I remember, said her friend. Fools of all kinds. She tinted Lisa's lips lightly with a light lipstick, making them look a little more expressive. Then she eyelined her eyes and put a little mascara on her lashes. Now that's a different look, Cindy said, satisfied with the result. Lisa looked at herself in the mirror and saw a slender, short girl with a mop of red hair and big black, slightly frightened eyes. Freckles scattered across her fair skin. You're very pretty, Cindy said to her. It's all thanks to you. No, it's not. I just emphasized it a little. With makeup, Lisa looked a little older than her years. All right, she said. You get ready too, or we'll miss the whole thing. Her friend rolled her eyes. Don't be ridiculous. The later it is, the more fun it is. She got dressed quickly, however, her thick black hair in a high ponytail, and she eyed her eyes, which made them look even bigger. Wore a black turtleneck and jeans. I took a warm sweater. Critically examined Lisa, who was wearing a long, thin green dress. Did you bring anything warm? It's going to be cold at night. Come on, Lisa shrugged. It's warm now, and then we'll be sitting by the fire anyway. I can bring you something. No, that's okay. As you know, they arrived at the village club. There weren't many people inside yet. There was music, but it was just a warm-up band. The girls waved to their classmates on the porch and went inside. There they said hello to the girls and sat down on a bench inside. There aren't many people inside, Lisa sighed. So early, said Cindy. Wait, in 2 hours it will be more interesting. Indeed, after a while the young people began to gather. The girls all had brightly colored hair, flowery dressed in the best they had found at home. The guys kept to themselves. Old men did not approach the girls. Were they all drinking beer, smoking on the porch, or discussing their man stuff? Wow, some strangers are here, said Cindy. I haven't seen them here before. Lisa looked in the direction her friend had nodded. There were 3 guys standing there. Yes, definitely not from their village. Her attention was drawn to the one who was in the company of the oldest. He must be 23, 24 years old. Tall, 2 heads taller than Lisa, black hair that curled a bit if you looked at it, and green eyes that he looked directly at her with. Usually guys would look away if they saw a girl catch them peeking. But not this one. He was staring intently straight at Lisa. Eventually, she couldn't stand it herself and looked away. Liked? Cindy asked snidely. Lisa shrugged her shoulders indifferently. Let's go dancing, she asked. Let's go. The music got louder. They were already fashionable songs, meant to be fun. The young people knew them by heart and ran to the dance floor with pleasure. In a minute, the girls had already forgotten about the unfamiliar guys and were dancing with pleasure, as they dance only at the age of 17 at a summer village disco. The fun lasted until 1 o'clock in the morning. Then the club director, Aka, the DJ, and the security guard, that she was closing the place down. All disappointed murmured, indignant, but not seriously, because they knew these are the rules. Nobody got upset. It is clear that now the fun will continue, just in another place. The guys who came on their cars and motorcycles drove the girls to each vehicle, got more people than the safety rules allowed. But the guys didn't care. The girls squealed, sat on each other's laps squeezed out, trying to give space to others who wanted it. They too climbed into the back seat in some unfamiliar car. Cindy sat little Lisa on her lap. She tilted her head so that she wouldn't bang her head on the ceiling and suddenly looked in the driver's mirror. Familiar and green eyes looked at her with a grin. Whose car is this? Lisa's mind flashed. She blushed and hastily looked away, pretending to be busy talking to her friend. The place was not far from the outskirts of the village, in the woods, about 15 minutes away. Firewood was already prepared there. Those guys who came first light a fire around the fire. There were logs cleaned from the bark. On them, the young people who have arrived sit down. A little farther away they have a coffin, a wooden table pinned up. It is used more as a warehouse. There is beer, cups in which they pour it, seed and breadcrumbs. The guys pour their own drinks, but it's customary to woo the girls. Lisa is embarrassed, but Cindy firmly takes her hand and they approach the table. Have a nice evening, girls. Sebastian, their classmate, tells them with a smile. He is already missing a front tooth. What's wrong, Sebastian? Cindy asked. His face became sad. The outsiders got into a fight. He nods somewhere to the side. Wow, why are they here then? Lisa asked cautiously. Sebastian waved his hand. We've already made up with them. Normal guys live in the neighboring village. Your mom would kill you for a tooth, Cindy said sympathetically. Yes, it's sad, my classmate admitted. But then he added philosophically, what can we do? Shouldn't we have fun now? The girls moved aside, chose a free place on one of the logs and sat down. Lisa carefully took a sip from a plastic cup and wrinkled her nose. It tasted bitter. You don't have to drink it if you don't want to. Quietly, her friend told her. Just keep it in your hand so you don't stand out. Otherwise, one of the guys might get to you. Lisa said, well. She decided to herself that she would try to drink at least this glass. Why here and now by this big fire, surrounded by laughing guys? Lisa really wanted to be like everyone else. There were a lot of people. Of course, everyone split into small groups that chatted amongst themselves. The main part was around the campfire. There's always some guy in every company who keeps the attention. Here it was a huge, 2-meter-tall, slightly overweight Mike. His loud bass could be heard throughout the forest. Mike always had an incredible amount of stories to tell. Maybe his stories weren't so incredible. He just knew how to tell them. Lisa laughed. She felt good, except for the cold. Cindy was right after all. She should have brought something warm with her. She shrugged shakily, and a moment later she felt something warm and heavy on her shoulders. She flinched and whirled her head around. Don't be frightened. Beautiful. A pleasant male voice came from above. The tall, black-haired stranger sat down on the log next to her. I'm not afraid, Lisa replied. Thanks for the jacket. You're welcome. What's your name? Lisa. I'm Ethan. He held out his hand, and Lisa shook it, surprised. The hand was big and hard with calluses. What small and delicate fingers you have, Ethan said. Lisa blushed and turned back to the fire. Why haven't I seen you here before? Asked the boy. You're a local. You just don't come here much. That's how. How old are you? You turned 18 at the end of May, and you're 24. You graduated from high school this year. Are you staying here or are you going to enroll? He sighed. It's a pity. I wouldn't want such a beautiful girl to leave us. Lisa grinned. You saw me a couple hours ago. Ethan shrugged his broad shoulders, and it took a minute to realize that I liked you. Lisa lowered her head. You're very persistent. Maybe other girls like it, but it rather intimidates me. He moved closer to her ear. Goosebumps ran down Lisa's neck. I'm sorry, he said, and then pulled back a little. I didn't mean to scare you. I just don't like to waste time. Did I like you? I did. After a while, Ethan's buddies came up to him and told him it was time to go home. He nodded and told them to go to the car. I'll catch up. The guys shot their eyes in Lisa's direction, but said nothing and shaved to the car. When will I see you next time? He asked. I don't know. Tomorrow. I don't know. Tomorrow, Lisa. She shook her head stubbornly. Ethan stood up and walked toward the car. Wait. Lisa ran after him. He turned around and stopped. What's with the jacket? She took it off her shoulders and handed it to him. Leave it on, it'll freeze. By the time you get home. And you in the car will not freeze. You'll give it back tomorrow. When Lisa came home, her mother was awake, sitting in the kitchen reading by the light of the lamp. What are you doing up? Lisa asked her. Mom looked up and smiled. The book was interesting. How was your walk? It was good. Lisa usually told her mother everything, but this time she didn't want to tell her about meeting a boy from the neighboring village who was 6 years older than her. Mom would worry. Okay, I'm going to bed tiredly, she said. Good night, daughter. Good night, Mommy. Wendy gave her daughter a look. She seemed to have something going on. Judging by the smile and the dreamy look, something good. And since she didn't want to talk about it, it's probably because of the boy. So she knew her daughter would grow up someday. She just didn't expect it to happen so soon. Of course, the next day Lisa went for a walk. So, did you like Ethan after all? Cindy asked her. I just want to give him his jacket back, Lisa said. Why are you blushing? I'm not blushing. That's why you asked me to keep the jacket. Mom would have asked what the jacket was, and if I'd given you the jacket, you wouldn't have been so nervous. You're different. Lisa frowned and angrily staggered forward. Cindy bit her lip, followed her. She had never seen her friend so nervous before. This time, as soon as they arrived. Lisa did nothing but look around as if searching for someone with her gaze. He never arrived so early. Cindy said softly, I'm not expecting anyone. Lisa said in a shaky voice, I'm sorry if I offended you. Added her friend, I didn't mean to. It's all right, said Lisa. And I'm sorry too. I guess you were right. I liked Ethan, and I'm a little scared. The important thing, Cindy said urgently, was not to rush things. Let things take their course. Trust your heart. Lisa took a deep breath, smiled, and rested her head on her friend's shoulder. I love you so much. You are the most wonderful thing. Cindy sighed and took Lisa's hand. I love you too. Ethan only arrived with his buddies when the bonfire started. By then, Lisa was sitting on pins and needles. She'd almost given up hope of ever seeing him. She even missed the moment when his car pulled up. But hello, beautiful. She heard a familiar, clear voice behind her. Lisa smiled and looked back. Hi, she said and held out her jacket. Thank you. It was very helpful. I see you're warmer dressed today, he remarked. Lisa nodded. Yes, decided it wasn't fair to make you freeze every day. For you, beautiful. I'd do anything for you. Lisa laughed. Let's warm up a bit, he suggested, pointing to a vacant place by the fire. Come on. When they sat down, Ethan took her hand in his. He did it calmly and naturally, as if it were meant to be. Lisa didn't even have the urge to pull his hand away. Tell me about yourself, Ethan asked after a few minutes. Lisa raised her eyebrows in surprise. What you want to hear? Everything. He looked at her very seriously and shook her hand harder. I'm actually curious, and you're curious about everything. I'm just an ordinary girl, Lisa said, feeling herself blush. Ethan shook his head. Not true. Could a girl with those huge black eyes and hair the color of fire be ordinary? He suddenly leaned forward and gently kissed her lips quickly and lightly, then pulled away and smiled. You started to say something, Lisa, but stopped talking and looked away. Ethan asked, still smiling as well, very cheeky. He shrugged. I just don't like wasting time. I really like you. You like me too. I can see that. I'm sorry. I'm not like that. Quickly, Lisa stood up and walked away. Ethan jumped up and ran after her. I'm sorry, he shouted. He caught up and stood in front of her, blocking her way. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you. Lisa lowered her head. I really like you a lot, he continued. I won't lay a finger on you again unless you ask me to. Honestly? Lisa asked. He nodded. I'll ask your permission before I do anything, agreed. Yes, he looked away. They were far away from the campfire where all the guys were. Their laughter and voices echoed in the background. There was a full moon shining in the sky, and there was a good view all around. If you want, we can take a little walk, Ethan suggested. I think there must be a lake somewhere nearby. Lisa nodded. Lake was too strong a word. It's just a little pond. But all right, let's go for a walk. They walked along the narrow forest path, grasshoppers singing, the air smelling of flowers and a little damp. I don't mind if I hold your hand, Ethan asked. No. When they reached the lake, which turned out to be a small pond drawn by Tina. The boy laid out on the grass the jacket he had borrowed from Lisa yesterday, and they sat down. Tell me about yourself, Lisa asked. He shrugged and ran his hand over his head of disheveled, thick black hair. I live in the Blacksop. Do you know where that is? Lisa nodded. Yes, 30 kilometers from us. How far is it for you to drive? He shrugged his shoulders at the car. It's quick. My parents work on a farm. I used to help out there, but now I work for my dad's brother. He has a little car shop on the highway. You like cars? Yeah, I'm pretty good with cars. The guys that come with me are my uncle and my sons. They're like my cousins. What else do you like about dogs? Without a second thought, Ethan answered. We have 5 of them at home. They sat there most of the night. Lisa came to her senses when she noticed that the sky on the horizon of the couple was about to dawn. Terrified, she screamed. Ethan got to his feet. Don't worry, I'll get you home. She shook her head. Don't in case Mom sees anything. I'll get to know her. There was something so mature and decisive in his voice that Lisa didn't argue. On the contrary, she felt very calm when they returned to the fire, where there was almost no one left. The Ethan brothers looked at them with a sly smile. Lisa blushed even though she had done nothing wrong. I'll take Lisa and be right back, Ethan told the brothers. He drove her all the way to the house. No one came out to greet them, and Lisa breathed a sigh of relief. We could go to the river with the boys this weekend, Ethan suggested. There's a lot of people there. You bring your friends too. Lisa said okay. He gave her a quick peck on the cheek before the meeting. Her mom didn't ask her anything. Or rather, she didn't ask her any specific questions, only inquired about her daughter's condition. "Are you okay?" "Yes," Mom answered Lisa every time. She really was fine. Ethan kept his promise and gave her time. Now they sought each other almost every day they went to the river. They walked a lot, talked to each other. Lisa told about herself, probably everything. She was a little embarrassed that she didn't know much about Ethan, but she rarely thought about it. "Please take your time," Cindy asked her once. "He's much older than you are, and you don't know much about him." Lisa blushed and looked away. "Have you already exhaled your friend?" "We love each other," Lisa said firmly. Cindy sighed. "Okay, it's up to you. Just be careful." Lisa smiled and looked at Ira. "I trust him completely. Don't worry." Her friend sighed, but decided not to interfere. "By the way, I remembered Cindy. What about your enrollment? I've applied to several institutions. So far, I like the history department the best. It sounds like it's going to be very interesting. I'm happy for you. You just don't seem happy. I don't want to break up with Ethan. I can't imagine we won't see each other very often. He could come into town to see you. Ethan works a lot." "Well, Cindy's thinking. It's a good test." "What do you mean?" "If your love is real, distance will only strengthen your feelings." "I hope so," Lisa said. Happiness ended abruptly. Early one morning, Lisa was awakened by a car horn and jumped up in bed. It could only be Ethan. She got up hurriedly and looked out the window. There stood a familiar car. The girl waved her hand, indicating that she was about to get out. "What's wrong?" Lisa heard her mother's sleepy voice. "Is it for me?" The daughter answered. "It's so early. I'll be right back." "Mom, don't worry." Lisa quickly put on her dress, hurriedly swallowed her sleep-damaged hair, and ran outside. "Hi," she said. "Sit down, in the front seat." "What's up?" She leaned over and kissed Ethan. He returned the kiss, but he looked embarrassed and confused. "How are you, beautiful?" "I'm good. I just saw you last night." "What happened?" Ethan lowered his head and stared at his hands. "I'm being drafted," he finally said. Lisa opened her mouth but couldn't say a word out of surprise. "This isn't a joke?" she asked after a moment. "No, when?" "Tonight is Lezginka." But as he sighed, "I should have gone a long time ago, but there were reasons for the postponement. I'd forgotten all about it. And yesterday I was reminded by the authorities. I said goodbye to my parents, so I came to see you." Lisa realized she was ready to cry. She sobbed. "And what did you say?" "Stop it. How will I be without you?" Lisa asked pitifully. "Well, I'm not going away for 10 years. As soon as I know your address, I'll write to you. You haven't even met my mom yet." Ethan sings awkwardly. "It comes out later." "I'm sorry, I don't have time right now. I gotta go." She nodded, barely holding back tears. "I love you." He smiled. "And I baby you. Don't miss me. Don't ruin your face with tears." They kissed one more time. Lisa got out of the car and waved goodbye to him. She stood like that until Ethan's car was out of sight. "That was your young man." She heard her mom's voice. Lisa turned around. Wendy was standing on the porch, tangled in her shawl and looking sadly at her daughter. The latter blushed at the ladies. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you. He's going into the army now, and he didn't tell you anything. He himself did not know." The mother frowned her eyebrows doubtfully, but said nothing. "Let's go inside. It's still cold." Lisa missed Ethan very much. Even though they'd only been together a few weeks, she felt like she couldn't imagine life without him anymore. She had gotten so used to his smile, his voice, his smell, that she didn't think she could survive a long separation from him. The first night after he left, Lisa couldn't sleep a wink. Even though she knew Ethan was far away, for some reason she expected to hear the squeak of tires and the familiar honking of a car. In the morning, Wendy didn't wake her. Lisa woke up late. Her head hurt and her eyes were barely open. She could feel them swelling with tears. Sitting up on the bed, suddenly Lisa felt a lump come up to her throat. After throwing up, it became easier. She washed her face and went back home. Breakfast was waiting on the table, covered with a clean towel. Pancakes with cottage cheese. Lisa poured herself hot, strong tea and began to eat. Mom came in. "Good morning." Good morning, darling. How are you feeling? I'm fine. You seem to have been up most of the night. Lisa shrugged. It's nothing. I feel better now. Do you need help with anything today? I don't. But Grandma could use some help. Okay, I'll go see her now. Anna lived at the other end of the village, but it was only a 15-minute walk. While Lisa was walking, the remnants of nausea passed and her mood improved a little. She found Anna in the vegetable garden. The woman was actively missing carrots. Weeds flew over the fence. Hello, grandmother, shouted Lisa. The woman turned around, frowned, but saw her granddaughter smiled. Hi there. Haven't seen you in a while. Come on in. Mom said you need help. Would you like some? Come and join us. Lisa sat down on the opposite side of the wide bed and started pulling weeds. She wasn't as fast as her grandmother, but strangely enough, the monotonous action was soothing for a while. They were silent. And then Grandma asked how you were doing. What's new? Lisa shrugged her shoulders. I don't know. I got into everywhere I wanted to go. Now we have to choose where the historical good choices lean. Anna approved. However, my mom and I will support any of your choices. Grandmother paused for a moment, quickly looked at her granddaughter and added, and this does not only apply to future studies. Lisa blushed. What do you mean, your boy? You know everything just because you're dating someone. Lisa sighed. I was. Her grandmother nodded and tested again, looking at her. You're going to tell me? Lisa nodded. She and her grandmother had a good relationship. Even though Anna seemed strict with her only granddaughter, she was affectionate. So Lisa calmly told her everything from the beginning. Grandmother listened without interrupting. Sometimes she pressed her lips together. Sometimes she threw the weeds out as if farther than usual. So hard she swung, but she listened to the end. What are you going to do now? She asked when her granddaughter had finished her story. Wait for him, eagerly, of course. Lisa exclaimed, I love him so much. Oh, that first love, Anna sighed. My head goes completely blank. Lisa gave you a funny smile. I don't know how to live without him. Grandma sighed. Life doesn't end after a man leaves. My dear, I am alive after your grandfather died, and Wendy lives after Sebastian died. Anna was silent, and Lisa felt ashamed. Two of her closest people had suffered the loss of lovers, and Lisa complained that Ethan would be away from her for a while. I'm ashamed. Grandma, she said. Forgive me, I'm like a silly little girl at night. The woman smiled unapologetically for her feelings. You have the right to feel them. Perhaps I didn't express myself correctly. Miss me and cry, sadness if you want, but don't forget about yourself. Don't turn your life into waiting for a man. What do you have besides him? Lisa smiled. You and Mom. Cindy, the future, studying books. Grandma smiled too. Your boyfriend's gonna text you. Yeah, he said he'd give me his address as soon as he got there. Ethan wrote 3 weeks later saying he was doing fine. He'd arrived at his duty station. The food is good. And Ethan had already made friends with the other guys. Lisa immediately wrote back that she was doing well, that she would be going to the city in a few days because she was starting school and that she missed him very much. How worried I was all those days, Lisa told her friend. I felt sick every day from the excitement. But today I got the letter and it was like I was free. Cindy listened attentively to her friend and thought about it, bit her lip, sighed, and asked her a question that had been tormenting her for a long time. Have you ever thought about being pregnant? The serene smile on Lisa's face was replaced by horror. No, she whispered quietly. It can't be. It can't, Cindy interjected. I thought you said you were with Ethan. Lisa shook her head desperately, her cheeks forgotten by Leda. We were close. It's just that Ethan said it wouldn't happen. I'm not ready. She looked desperately at Ira, who decided to be supportive. Maybe you're right, and the nausea was just excitement. I was just guessing. Lisa sighed and stopped talking. Something whispered from her finger, as if she was calculating in her head. Are you right? Desperately, she said. I'm late, and I'm pretty late. I'd forgotten all about it. What am I going to do now? Her friend came over to her and hugged her tightly. They stood like that for a few minutes. Then Cindy led Lisa to the bed, sat down, and sat beside her. She continued to hold her hand and spoke calmly in a low voice. Don't panic. First of all, it's not definite yet. We should at least do a test. Yes, in principle, that's enough. And then, based on the result, we'll have to act. Where do we get the test? Lisa asked. They don't sell them in your store. Is the nearest pharmacy far away in your ear supposed to be? Said Cindy. And she won't say anything to anyone. You're sure? That Wendy was the name of their village paramedic. She was a chubby little girl of about 30. She took everything in life lightly. Jenna his Sebastian loved, though she was considered unserious and frivolous. Nevertheless, it was always possible to turn to her for help. Despite her youth, she always knew how to help. The children she immunized almost never cried. They were mesmerized by the blonde aunt with bright red lips who sang songs, made funny faces, and told interesting stories during the vaccinations. Despite the seeming seriousness, those who turned to Wendy for help knew that this girl would never share the problems of her patients. Pregnancy test. Fun, she asked the girls. Of course there is. She rummaged through one of the countless drawers of her huge old wooden cabinet and pulled out a white and pink package. There are 2 of these here. To be safe, I recommend doing both. If both are positive, the practical Cindy clarified, then it's 100% pregnancy. The paramedic shrugged. No, of course, everyone makes mistakes. But the probability in this case is very high. If there will be a plus run and to me, I'll give a referral for an ultrasound in the city. Lisa nodded to Wendy and looked at her carefully and asked, It's a long time. The girl shrugged. I don't know, probably a few weeks. The paramedic waved her hand nonchalantly. Then don't worry. There's plenty of time for an abortion at that age. Lisa pressed her lips almost bloody and nodded. Or are you going to have a baby? I don't know. The girl whispered almost silently. All right, she cut her ear off. Why guess ahead of time? Take it and do it. You'll come back later. When they came out and asked to stay with you, Lisa nodded. I'm scared. It's going to be all right. Both tests came back positive. Lisa looked at the 2 small paper strips and did not realize what she was experiencing. But I asked her once. I don't know, she answered honestly. Do you want to go to Wendy's or do you want to talk to your mom? Lisa has no idea how to say this to Mom. Come on, Aunt Wendy. You're just a sunshine. She probably won't even raise her voice at you. My mom would kill me. Lisa smiled sadly. Her friend's words cheered her up. I'll talk to my mom. Cindy was right. Wendy didn't scream, didn't cry. It was like she wasn't even surprised. How are you feeling? I'm okay. I just don't know what to do now. Mom, you should probably tell Ethan anyway. Wendy said softly, You're right. Shall I come with you to the ultrasound? Yes, please. Mom almost didn't let go of her hand the whole time they were in the doctor's office. The pregnancy was confirmed. Lisa was even shown a small seed on the screen. Her unborn child, the moment she saw it, she realized she was not going to have an abortion. This is what she told her mother. As soon as they left the hospital, Wendy nodded and smiled. Grandma and I will support you no matter what happens. Thank you, Mommy. Lisa was still hesitant to write a letter to Ethan. She didn't know what was stopping her from doing so. Fear that he wouldn't be happy about the unexpected pregnancy, that he'd leave her, tell her to have an abortion. Probably all of them at once. In any case, she had enough to do as it was. School had started. Wendy and Cindy were helping her move things into the dorms. The day before, she and her mother and grandmother had had a long discussion about what to do. The best solution was suggested by the wise Anna. Go, granddaughter, study as if nothing had happened. When you realize that it became absolutely unbearable, you will have 2 options: or go on sabbatical leave or transfer to a correspondence department. There's another option, Mom added. If you want to continue studying, we'll rent you an apartment and take turns babysitting. No, that's too expensive and too serious, too mature, Lisa said. And here we leave the options with academics and distance learning. Studying was very interesting. The first month passed almost unnoticed. The only thing that bothered Lisa was Ethan's silence. He never replied to her first letter. At the end of September, Lisa decided to spend a weekend in the light shelf. She missed her mother, her grandmother, and her friend. How good was it to be home? As she rode the train, a nasty fall rain fell the whole way, hinting at the end of a gentle Indian summer. And at home, Wendy stoked the stove. Anna. She was baking a mountain of Lisa's favorite cabbage pies. Her and her mom's red cat, named Bandit, joyfully jumped on her lap and poked her. "How are you doing?" Mom asked. "I'm fine. I like studying there. How's the dormitory?" Grandma asked. "It's okay. The roommates are nice." "Yes, they are. One is a freshman, like me, and the other is in her third year. They're both almost honors students." "That's great." After meeting her family, Lisa wanted to see her friend. Cindy was working at her mother's store as she had planned. Lisa dressed warmer in long rubber boots, took an umbrella, and went to meet her friend. "What people?" Cindy shouted when she saw her. She was just serving a customer. She turned around, and Lisa saw a smiling face and a paramedic. "Oh, our mother-to-be," she exclaimed. "Hi, girls." Lisa said hello. "How are you guys doing?" Cindy shrugged. "We're doing the same old thing. What could happen in the village?" "Don't stall for time. Tell me about yourself." Lisa shrugged her shoulders. "I don't have much news either. I don't do anything but study." "How's the pregnancy going?" I asked in a professional tone in her ear. "Everything is fine," Lisa smiled. "No nausea. Not anymore. I don't feel sleepy, on the contrary. I feel more energized." "That's good. Did you write Ethan?" Cindy intervened. Lisa sighed no. "He didn't answer the first letter either." "What a bastard." Maybe he's just busy." The paramedic listened to their conversation with growing interest. "Who is Ethan?" Suddenly she asked. "The baby's father." "My young man," Lisa answered, blushing for some reason. Wendy nodded. "I get that. I mean, who is he?" "In our village, I don't know any guys called Ethan, and he's not from around here," said Lisa. "Lives in Black Hill, tall guy with black hair." "Yeah," Wendy bought Lisa's lip. Didn't pay much attention to it. Cindy frowned. "Do you know something about him?" Wendy averted her eyes. "Okay, rumors." "Like what?" Lisa asked. "You should probably talk to him yourself," the paramedic said. "I'm not sure of anything." "Maybe it's all just contract gossip," already shouted Cindy. Lisa hugged her arms around her stomach fearfully. Wendy looked at her hands and took a deep breath. "Okay, so I'll tell Ethan. My acquaintances say he's a terrible womanizer, that he has a girl or two in every village in the county." Lisa turned pale, and Wendy looked at her guiltily, and continued, "I also heard that there is a woman with whom he has 2 children. It's not like they're officially married. They're living in a common law relationship." Lisa felt dizzy and began to fall slowly to the floor. "You scared us, Mother." The first thing she heard when she came to her senses. She was lying in the back of the store on some crates. Wendy and Cindy were standing over her. The paramedic was holding some kind of vial of foul-smelling liquid. "How are you?" Wendy asked her. "I don't know." Lisa shook her head weakly. She carefully sat up, no longer dizzy. The girl looked at her saviors in turn and said in a suddenly firm voice, "I need to find out if it's true. Getting information in the village is much easier than in the city. There is always someone who knows someone else, who knows a third person, who finally has the information they need." Unfortunately, the rumors Wendy had been hearing were confirmed. Ethan did have a lot of girlfriends with some. He was even dating this summer. The rumors about his roommates were also true. Ethan was in and out of relationships. He had a 3-year-old daughter and a 1-year-old son. There were rumors that they might not be Ethan's children, but no one knew for sure. It didn't matter much, though. Everything she wanted to know, Lisa had already learned. Now she lay on her friend's bed and wept bitterly. Cindy sighed, stroked her red hair with Putin, and did not know what to say. "He's a bastard," she said in her heart, "and not worth your tears." Lisa sat down on the bed and wiped her face with her palms. "Are you right?" Lisa said calmly. "I have a baby to think about." "That's right." Lisa wrote another letter. In it, she told everything she had learned about him calmly, without tears or accusations. She asked her not to write about the baby again. Lisa wouldn't tell. I'm sure, her mother asked her. He is the father after all. The daughter shook her head. He has enough children and women as it is. I don't want to become one of them. Wendy pulled her to her side and kissed her on the top of her head. Lisa continued, it's only my child. I raised it myself. Don't forget we are always with you. Lisa returned to the city and continued her studies. She tried to immerse herself in it with her head, to keep even the thought of Ethan out of her head. Besides, she had to think about the future baby's health, take tests, go to doctor's appointments, do ultrasounds. At the second examination, Lisa was informed that it was a boy. Anna said happily when her granddaughter shared this news with her family. We are finally going to have a man. Wendy smiled, thinking of a name. She asked her daughter. Lisa shrugged her shoulders. I'm still deciding. There's been no news from Ethan. No. Maybe something happened to him. Watch out, Mom asked. Lisa shook her head negatively. Valley, our paramedic, has acquaintances from his village. They know his parents, and they receive regular letters from Ethan. So there is nothing wrong with him. Grandmother listened to this for a frown, and then said, well, fuck him then. Next, she uttered several long and literary expressions that Lisa had not heard even from her most bully classmates. Anna exclaimed delightedly to Wendy, Grandma, you're so funny. Anna shrugged innocently. I can be angry too, she said. And in a calmer tone, she added, and don't hurry with the name. When you see your child for the first time, you will know what his name is. Lisa tried to go home once or twice a month on weekends. The first few months of pregnancy were easy. She wanted to move more, to go for walks. She slept little, had time to learn everything and rest. It got harder after New Year's Eve. Her belly came out right away. Walking became harder. The tentative delivery date was set for mid-April. Lisa consulted with her mother and grandmother and went to the dean's office to solve the issue of further education. The dean of her faculty was an intelligent and understanding woman. At one time, Jenna herself remained a single mother with 3 children and raised all 3 on their feet. So she talked to Lisa calmly and thoroughly. Did she find out about the child's father, where Lisa lived, and how much help she could get from her family? I don't think you need to lose a year or 2 by taking a sabbatical, the dean said. It will be enough to switch to a part-time program. I'll talk to your professors. Maybe they'll let you close some of your credits early in the next month or 2. Then you'll come back in the summer for exams. Is it right that you'll have someone to leave the baby with for a couple of hours? Lisa nodded yes, Mom will be able to help. The woman smiled. It was my thesis defense. I'm standing there, telling the essence of my work. And my mom is wheeling the stroller around the university with my daughter. Lisa smiled. I made sure you got all the textbooks and study guides you needed so you could study at home. Of course, if things get tough, you can always take a vacation. But I wouldn't recommend it. Why not? Lisa asked timidly. Jenna sighed. Knowledge is quickly forgotten, and most importantly, you forget how to learn. It seems that you don't have the mind and strength to master so much material. Most of the girls don't come back to us after childbirth and vacation. I wouldn't want you to waste your potential. You're very capable. Lisa blushed and lowered her head. Thank you. Children are a blessing. But someday they'll grow up and go away, and you'll be with you forever. I'll remember that. Thank you for being so understanding. Lisa remembered the advice. When she got home, she allowed herself a whole week of rest by getting up late, lying blissfully in bed. Then she would go to the kitchen, where it was already hot from her mother's stove, and her mother's stove leisurely, wash her face and eat breakfast. Then Lisa would take the cat on her lap and read something in the kitchen, cook something simple for lunch, and wait for her mother to come home from work. Wendy tried to bring something tasty. Often she would pass on guests from her grandmother, who cooked her granddaughter's only goodies. By the end of the pregnancy, I'll be a lump, Lisa grumbled, opening another bag of pies. Wendy shrugged. All right, I'll eat them all myself then, she said. More what? Already with her mouth full, she remained silent. Lisa, moving the package towards her. After a week of such life, she started to repeat the study material. Tried to go out for a walk. Of course, in winter you can't walk much. but at least she could walk to the store. She also stopped by the nurse's station to see Wendy. They've been talking to her a lot lately, too. Haven't heard from Ethan? Asked Lisa's friend. She shook her head, never answered. Do you think he knows about the baby? I hope not. Only if he corresponds with some of the guys in our village. And as far as I know, he didn't have any friends here. Well, said Wendy thoughtfully, it's a village. Word travels fast. Lisa furrowed her brow and looked at her. I haven't said anything to anyone. The paramedic immediately clarified. But you know, rumors are a thing. Are they already gossiping about me? Lisa asked. Her friend averted her eyes, pretending not to have heard anything. Wendy answered. It doesn't matter. People assume different things. Some remember that you dated a guy from out of town all summer. Some think you were out on the town. Wendy suddenly saw her friend smiling. What are you doing? It's good to have these rumors. Let them spread. Wendy suddenly opened her mouth wide and smiled too. I see. You want Ethan not to realize it's his baby when he gets back from the army. Lisa smiled sadly. Sebastian, I don't. I don't want that man in my life ever again. I understand. With the beginning of spring, great changes came to their village. At first, it was just rumors, but then it became clear it was serious. It started when someone bought the abandoned lot next door to Barbara and Lisa's house. A huge work crew arrived. The old uninhabited house was demolished, and on its foundations they quickly, literally in a month, built a strong new cottage. The men who met the builders informed the whole village that the owner of the new house would soon be a city man, apparently very wealthy. He was going to build a farm in their village, or start growing a garden, or something like that. The women of the Matveev family had heard all this news, but they were not particularly excited. Men are gossips. Anna remarked philosophically, worse than women. If in fact a man comes who wants to make a big enterprise in our village, that's a good thing. There will be new jobs. And if not, we'll live the old way, which isn't bad either. Wendy and Lisa were also calm about the rumors. The only thing they were curious about was watching the new house being built nearby. Wendy was coming home from work when she ran into a new neighbor. First, an unfamiliar man appeared on the street in front of her. He was walking briskly toward her house. Vera was curious because there were no other houses further down the street. They weren't expecting anyone to visit, so it could only be a new neighbor. Unfortunately, only his broad, strong back was visible from behind. The man was wearing an expensive black coat, a bright green hat, and leather boots. They looked so thin, Wendy wondered how he didn't get cold in them. The supposed neighbor walked past her house, and she was convinced her assumption was correct. Wendy was about to go into her house. Just as suddenly, she saw the man slip, grunt loudly, and fall. Muffled, hitting the back of his head on the ground. Wendy asked and ran over to him. Her neighbor's eyes were closed. She shook him by the shoulders. Are you alive? He groaned. I'll run for the paramedic now, Wendy said, and started to get up. The man slowly opened his eyes. Don't? Barely audible, he asked. I think I'm all right, but I'm just banged up pretty bad. Can I help you up? Yes, please. Wendy leaned over and put his arm behind her back, wrapped her arms around him, and pulled him up forcefully. The neighbor groaned, but with her help he got up. You live in this house, don't you? Just in case, Wendy asked. He nodded. Let's go, she said firmly. I'll help you walk together. They walked slowly to his house. The man took out his keys and opened the door. He turned to Wendy, realizing that this was not the best way to start an acquaintance. But maybe you could stop by for a visit. She grinned at me. We need to examine your head and assess how serious things are inside. The house was already fully furnished. Everything is very simple and solid. Lots of wooden furniture on the floor, warm carpets. The house itself is not as big as it looks from the outside and very cozy. Do you live alone? Wendy asked. I do. My son is coming to visit a little later. They went into the kitchen. The neighbor threw his coat and hat on a chair and sat down on the second chair. Wendy, thinking, also took off her outer clothes and put them on top of his coat. I'm watching your head. I'd be grateful. She stood behind him and gently probed the back of his head. A large lump was pouring out of a large bump there. "I'll get some snow now," Wendy said. "We should put some cold on it." "No, don't. I've got ice in the fridge." She took out an ice pack, wrapped it in a towel, and put it on the back of her head. "I'm not dizzy. Not now, but the nausea is gone." No double vision. The man shook his head negatively and smiled and looked at her curiously. "I'm fine. What is your name?" "My good, Saving Wendy." "What a marvelous name." "I'm John. Nice to meet you too. So you're my neighbor?" "I am. Have some tea with me." She shook her head. "I'm sorry, I have to go. My daughter's waiting at home," he said. And Wendy's husband frowned. "I don't have a husband. I'm sure you're fine." "Yeah, I'll lie down for a while and I'll be as good as new. You get some rest. If you need anything, come in." "Thank you, Wendy." "Have a good day." Wendy was somehow embarrassed by the stare of the stranger. He looked her age, maybe a few years older. I guess she was just used to men looking at her with interest. And he's handsome, she thought as she approached the house, and immediately scolded herself for those thoughts. What did she care? Her task is to think about her daughter and wait for the birth of her grandson. "Mom, what took you so long today?" Lisa asked her. "Did you meet the new neighbor?" Said Wendy. "How are you feeling?" "I feel great. Let's have lunch." "Let's do it." The next day, when Wendy was at work, there was a knock at their door. Lisa was reading the textbook at the time. She wasn't expecting any guests. Cindy and Wendy were at work, and Grandma's homework wasn't over yet either. And no one else came by. "Come in," she shouted. The door opened and a tall young man came in. "Good afternoon," he said. "It's you, Wendy." Lisa raised her eyebrows in surprise. "No, I'm Lisa. And Wendy is my mom." "Nice to meet you, Lisa. My name is Thomas." He held out his hand to her and she shook it. "So it was your mom who saved my dad yesterday." "She did." Lisa was surprised. She hadn't said anything like that. Yesterday, she only mentioned that she'd met our new neighbor. "But your mom is modest, isn't she?" "My dad slipped and fell yesterday and hit his head." "Wow, hard." "Yeah, he even blacked out. Good thing Wendy saw it. She helped him home and gave him first aid." "How's your dad feeling?" "He has a huge lump on his head and his tailbone hurts a lot," the man said. "But other than that, he's fine." "I'm glad. In fact, I wanted to thank Wendy for her help." "Oh, I get it. She's still at work and she'll be back in an hour. You can wait for her here if you want, if that's okay." "No, Lisa's just getting up to help me with the billet. And then we can all have lunch together. Will you call your father over here, or shall we come in?" She noticed he wasn't talking and was looking at her belly in a strange way. "If I'm too brash, I apologize," Lisa added. "We keep things simple in the village." He seemed embarrassed. "Oh no, I'm sorry, that's not what I meant at all. I'd be happy to help you with your lunch. And then, if you don't mind, we'll come back to our place. It hurts my father to walk without a problem," Lisa said, and went to the refrigerator to get the groceries she needed. "As for the embarrassment you noted, I was just wondering if your husband would mind." Lisa smiled and handed him a bucket of potatoes, and a knife and a clean bowl. "I'm single. Can you peel potatoes?" The boy nodded. "Yeah, my mom died when I was 10. Since then, my dad and I lived alone and took turns cooking, so I know how to do everything." "I'm sorry for your loss," Lisa said. They spent the hour in silence. When Wendy returned from work, she found a surprising scene. Thomas introduced himself, explained the situation. Lunch was almost ready, and soon they all went to the neighbor's house together. Lisa immediately noticed that her mother liked Vasily, despite the painful tailbone. At the table, he tried to woo her and kept his eyes on her. At some point, Lisa crossed her gaze with Thomas and realized that he was watching their parents too. The boy suddenly smiled slyly at Lisa and asked Lisa loudly, "I haven't shown you our house yet, have I? Would you like to see it?" Lisa smiled politely, "Sure." They got up from the table and Thomas led her into the back of the house. "Do you live here too?" Lisa asked him. "Not yet. I have a lot of things to do in the city, so I'll be in and out. But I will move in later. I'll have to help my father." "So is it true that you're the ones who'll be building something here?" "Yes, we are." The young people found themselves in a large room that looked like a living room. Lisa was surprised to see that there was a huge fireplace with a fire burning merrily against the wall. They sat down on big soft armchairs near the fireplace. My father is a big businessman, except that in recent years he's gotten tired of. He decided he wanted something closer to nature for his soul. He found some vacant land in your village, built a house. Now he wants to start farming. Lisa smiled. He wants to have chickens and plant a vegetable garden. Thomas laughed. Well, sort of. He's going to build a farm first, then plant wheat, oats, other crops. If all goes well, he'll have rabbits and chickens. I guess that's a lot of money. That's all Lisa could say. Sounds very nice. Do you want to do it yourself? He sighed. I honestly don't know yet. I'm very close to my father, but I've lived in the city all my life and never thought about living like this, although it's not so bad here. Lisa smiled. I think it will be a bit difficult for you, here for the first time, especially in winter. But I've told you about myself. Why do you live here all the time? Yes, I'm a local. I was born here, grew up here, graduated from high school. From September, I went to history school in the city. Then when the term got longer, I transferred to a correspondence school. Now I'll be here. Aren't you bored? Lisa raised her eyebrows in surprise. How could it be boring? Thomas shrugged his shoulders. I don't know. I just can't imagine what I would do as a young pregnant girl. I study, read books, help my mom with chores, go out with my girlfriends. He nodded along nicely. That's when John, Thomas' voice came from far away. Lisa, where are you? Are we here, Dad? Thomas shouted. Lisa stood up. Thanks for the interesting conversation. They went back into the kitchen. We have to go, daughter, said Wendy. Thank you for a wonderful lunch, said John. I hope this will become our good tradition. Goodbye, said Lisa. Over time, a good neighborly relationship developed between their homes. John seemed to be the one who initiated the socializing the most. It was easy to guess that he fell in love with Wendy at first sight. This was quickly realized by everyone except Wendy herself. It was as if she was afraid of the situation. She was afraid even to suppose that after so many years of lonely life, someone would disturb her peace. So she stubbornly pretended not to notice anything. Her relationship with John remained only friendly. But he took his time and never gave up hope. John was always as polite and careful with her as possible. Thomas and Lisa were not opposed to the companionship of their parents. They even to some extent became rundown and conspiratorial. Sometimes I feel silly, Lisa said. They took walks together, pretending to watch the farm construction in progress. In reality, they were just giving their parents time together. Why is that surprising? Thomas asked. They're adults, and we run around leaving them alone like they're little. You think that if they're older than us, they're the smartest. I think they can work things out for themselves. Thomas smiled. We don't decide anything for them. Let them work it out for themselves. But our parents may also have some things in their heads that prevent them from being objective. And you and I just help them a little bit. Lisa sighed. Okay, maybe you're right. He smiled. How are you feeling? I'm fine. The only annoying thing is that it's getting harder to walk every day. I feel like I'm being inflated like a balloon. Probably won't be able to move at all by April. You want me to bring my ATV? I'll give you a ride on it. Lisa laughed. Where would I go for a ride? Thomas wasn't embarrassed. Do you need to get outdoors every day? If you can't walk, we'll go for a ride. Lisa smiled at Thomas. We're not in the city right now. Here you can walk out on the porch and all the air is fresh. Don't pick on me. Will you get tired of staying home? Well, as long as I can still go out. Thomas decided to turn the conversation to something else. How's school going? You were in town last week. It's good. I'm almost done with all my credits. Only 2 more to go. And even one of the easier exams was automatic. What about the rest? I'll take them this summer like everyone else. You're a good girl, Lisa. Really? I admire you. Come on, don't argue. You're good. It laughed. Lisa felt easy and good. With Thomas, it was as if she suddenly had the big brother she had longed for as a child. Even though he hadn't moved out yet, He was at his father's house often and was always there when she needed him. They always had something to talk about. Lisa and Thomas' lives were both similar and different at the same time. He grew up in the city, not needing money. She in a simple country family. But what they had in common was that they had both lost one of their parents early and loved the other one desperately. Thomas began to experience village life and understood his father better and better. It was quiet, peaceful, everything was real. In the city, it was as if there was a lot of unnecessary things. Too many people, sounds, cars, unnecessary things to do, unnecessary acquaintances. And here only the things that really mattered. Thomas loved coming to this little village. Loved having dinner with Lisa and her mother. Loved that his father was finally smiling. So many years after his mother's death, he was having fun with Lisa. She was unlike any girl he had ever socialized with. She wanted to protect her, keep her safe, make her laugh. Thomas wasn't kidding about the ATV. He'd left it behind the very next week, even though he hadn't really needed to. But when he rode it up to Lisa's house, she came out to meet him and started laughing. He realized that her laughter was worth any effort. Lisa and Thomas could talk about anything in the world. The only thing they didn't touch on was discussing Lisa's father of the baby. He realized there was some unpleasant history there. Lisa had told him all about it herself. His reaction was predictable. That story was a nightmare. I'd like to break that Ethan's legs and arms. Come on, I've forgotten all about him. I doubt it, honestly. I wouldn't forget about such a thing. Lisa smiled. The most important thing to me is that I'm not alone. I love my baby. I also have my mom, my friend's grandmother. And I seriously said, Thomas. Lisa smiled. We've only known you for a little while. So, what does it matter? I'm grateful for those words. And I'm very glad US moved here. You've become a very close friend to me. Thomas wrinkled his nose as if he'd swallowed something sour, but then he smiled. I'm very pleased to hear that. You're a close friend, too. At the end of March, the main part of the farm was ready. Lisa didn't understand how it could be built in such a short time. When she asked Thomas about it, he only laughed and shrugged his shoulders. Money does wonders. And my father is also a great boss and organizer. He knows how to get people working quickly and efficiently. So you're not going to hire locals? Why not? On the contrary, my dad wanted to. If there will be people willing to take their new jobs, all that. Lisa smiled sadly. They don't know how to work like that. Her friends smiled immediately. Believe me, Dad will teach them. He gives good conditions, trains them, tells them the rules. Those who obey them get perks, and such that you won't want to quit. Who breaks the rules, quits after the first screw-up? No forgiveness. Strict but effective. It'll be interesting to see what happens. Well, not everyone will pass the test, of course. I'm guessing about 30 or 40% will laugh. But trust me, the ones who stay will be the best workers. That's great. Are you busy right now? Lisa asked. No, not really. Why don't you take me? Harry, please. No problem. When he dropped her off at her friend's house, he asked what time to pick her up. Yeah, I'll walk there myself, strolled over. Thomas frowned. What do you mean I'll walk myself? I have to walk. I never leave the house. Don't worry. Cindy will walk me part of the way. Okay, but call me when you get there so I don't worry. Lisa rolled her eyes. That's the last thing I need. You're not my daddy, Lisa. She laughed and disappeared into her friend's house. Thomas sighed and drove home. How stubborn she can be sometimes, like a girl. Well, she is a girl. She's only 19. He suddenly caught himself smiling. Every time he thought of Lisa, even though she was just his friend. Who are you kidding? An inner voice asked suddenly, but he shook his head, distracting himself from these thoughts. In fact, he should be doing something useful instead of thinking about Lisa. He even managed to do that. He had to fill out the paperwork for the farm. He was so engrossed in it that when he looked up, it was past 2 o'clock. Checked his phone for Lisa. There was nothing. Had her friend still had some vague inner restlessness that wouldn't let go. Thomas tried to tell himself that everything was fine, that he was just winding himself up. It wasn't working. He called Lisa. No one answered the phone. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore, so he jumped out of the house, got in his car, and drove off. He knew that Lisa usually came back from her friend's house through the backyard, and it was faster that way. He was already halfway down the road, but there was no one in sight. Suddenly, he noticed a bright red spot by the fence. He pulled up, stopped, jumped out of the car. Lisa was sitting upright on the ground with her back leaning against the fence. Her eyes were half closed her face. The pale bandage of her neck and chest dripped drops of sweat. Lisa screamed, "Thomas," running up to her. She opened her eyes with difficulty and looked up at him. "Thomas, it's so good of you to come." Tears rolled down her cheeks from relief. She was so scared alone here. For a moment, Lisa thought she would have to give birth right here in the field. "Lisa, don't cry." He's scared. Why is she crying? She's in pain. "What's wrong with you?" "I don't know. I think labor is starting so badly my stomach hurts and pulls." He took a deep breath in and out. There was no need to panic. He was the only one who could help Lisa. He must pull himself together. "It's okay," in a steady voice, Thomas said. "We'll get in the car now and drive to the hospital." Lisa is sobbing and seems to have calmed down a little. "Can you stand up?" "I don't know." He leaned over, gently embraced her, gave her his arm, helping her up. Lisa slowly stood up. "Come on, I'll put you in the car." In the same calm, confident tone, Thomas continued. Even through her clothes, he could feel her heart pounding. He was scared too. "There," he said affectionately, putting Lisa in the car. She nodded, tried to smile, but then a spasm ran down her face. Lisa made Thomas go around the car again, get in and start it. He agonized over which road would be the quickest to get to town. In any case, it was at least 2 hours of road. Would he make it? How would Lisa stand those 2 hours? Maybe the right thing to do was to call an ambulance, but they would definitely take longer. Thomas groaned pitifully. "Lisa, scared of what?" he asked. "Don't leave me, please. I'll never leave you." With one hand, he clutched the steering wheel, and with the other, he squeezed her cold, pale hand. "How are you?" "I'm really scared. It's going to be okay." Lisa noisily inhaled the air with her nose. "Do you believe me?" "I do." "Of course I do." Lisa was silent for a while, wrapping her arms around her stomach and breathing heavily. It hurt a lot, like waves coming in waves. "Less now." "Good." "Oh, what's wrong?" "I didn't tell my mom anything," Lisa exclaimed. "She and Grandma will be worried. I'll call them as soon as we get to the hospital. Thank you for everything you do for me." "Lisa, come on." "How could I not? They're lucky." Thomas ran into the emergency room and began to ramble on about what had happened. Experienced nurse on duty. "Got it. Shetta, calm down," he said. "We'll help you now." He took the cat and went to get Thomas. There they transferred Lisa from the car and took her to the emergency room. "Call the on-call obstetrician-gynecologist," shouted the nurse. He had already taken a pen and a clipboard and was quickly asking Lisa something. "Daddy, please sit down," a woman in a white uniform told him sternly. Thomas froze on the spot in surprise. "What is it?" The woman addressed Lisa affectionately. "I think I'm in labor." "No. Let's deal with it now." She turned to her brother. "Kostya, please escort our daddy into the corridor." Kostya nodded, stood up, and resolutely took Thomas by the elbow, led him out of the office. "Wait," he told him. "The doctor will come out and tell him everything." Waiting was excruciatingly difficult. He ran through 1,000 possibilities in his head. What if he brought Lisa in? Too late? What if there were complications? What if something happened to the baby? When the doctor came out, he rushed toward her, nearly knocking her to the ground. "Easy, easy on the sedative," she said. "That she's okay?" "Well, I mean, labor's starting, of course, but everything's on track. Mom and baby are fine. We're going to move her to a room now." Thank you." "I'm glad we made it in time." She nodded. "Are you staying with her?" Did Thomas not expect such a question? "I don't know, unless she wants to." "Hadn't you two discussed it before?" "We haven't had a chance." "All right, I'll ask Lisa." The doctor nodded. "You can ask her yourself, though." The doctor stepped aside to let him in. He went in. Lisa was sitting up and seemed calm. There seems to have been a little misunderstanding, Thomas said. The doctor thinks I'm your boyfriend or husband. I don't know. Lisa smiled yes, that was funny. What else could you think though? I agree. But she asked me if I would attend the birth with you. Lisa's face turned pitiful. You don't want to what? I'm sorry, I can't ask you to do that, Lisa. Thomas didn't know what to say to that. Do you want it? Finally, he asked. She looked up at him timidly. I'm scared. And if you were with me, it would be easier. He nodded. Well then, I'll be with you. All of this they went through together, the dark one never leaving her side for a second. He realized he had never been so worried about anyone. When it was over, the baby was carried away to be examined, and Lisa threw herself onto her pillow and fell asleep instantly. He was finally able to exhale. He had gotten used to being called Daddy, Father, all this time. There was no strength or desire to correct them and explain the situation. It was only a pity that Lisa herself considered him just a friend. He suddenly realized that he loved her, that he was willing to do anything for her, that he loved her, and this baby that had just come into the world. Just as he sat back in his chair and closed his eyes, the phone rang. How is she? Dad asked. All is well, Thomas reported. The boy. Dad coughed awkwardly. No, okay, got it. Tell him everything's fine. Lisa's asleep now. What about you? What about me? I didn't give birth. Come home. You'll have a shower and Lisa will need to bring things. Thomas rubbed it exactly. I don't even know what she needs. I'll ask Wendy and send you a list. Thanks, Dad. Should we come too? No, I can handle it. You guys better get everything ready. All right, hang in there. We'll be waiting for you. They were discharged 3 days later. All that time, he came to see Lisa every day at the hospital. What do you want to call him? He asked, looking at the way she held the baby against her chest. Nick, that's a beautiful name. Thank you. And I decided to give it Daddy's middle name. Seeing his perplexed look, she explained my daddy's. Oh, it's beautiful. Thomas Lisa gave him a serious look. Thank you so much for everything you've done for me. He shrugged. Come on, it's nothing. It's not nothing. But we're friends. Yes, she lowered her eyes to the baby, and in a quieter voice, she said we're friends. They had a whole party at home with Wendy, John, Grandma, Cindy, and Wendy. They all got together and renovated and set up the nursery, bought a bed and everything the baby needed, walked around until late at night, and Thomas suddenly realized that he and his father had somehow become part of this family. I think our parents are finally bonding, Lisa said, when she and Thomas went for a walk. He pushed the stroller in front of him. Little Nick was asleep, content in the spring sunshine of May. Yeah, your mom finally let your daddy take care of her. I think he's been doing it for a while. But before that, she pretended like she didn't understand. I think she just seems to be out of it. She hasn't dated anyone since Daddy. Thomas nodded. Oh, now I get it. Dad didn't have anyone much after Mom either. Either way, I'm happy for them. Me too. They walked a little more along the saluting, sun-bright road. How are you doing anyway? Yeah, I'm very lucky. I'm surrounded by wonderful people. I couldn't have done it alone, I would have. Thomas objected. You're very strong. But it's nice to have someone to help you, isn't it? Thank you. But enough about me. How are you? Good, I've noticed you've been sleeping here most nights. I do. I think I've finally moved in. Oh, wow. Glad, of course. Now I'll be able to exploit you even more. He laughed. I'll be happy about that. Oh, yeah. A real friend would have taught me self-reliance. Well, I guess I'm not a real friend. He was silent, but then he said without raising his head, I'd do anything for you. Thank you, Lisa said quietly. Her cheeks were flushed and she leaned over, pretending to check on her son. I don't understand anything about farming, Thomas said desperately. He was holding little Nick in his arms, but he was so worried that he didn't seem to be downloading him anymore, but rather keeping him awake. But you don't have to, do you? Softly said Lisa, gently taking his son from him. Didn't you graduate from the Agricultural Institute? He grinned. No, I should. My father never did it either. But he's a quick learner. He has more experience in other areas too, Lisa pointed out. Well, you're probably right. Don't be so hard on yourself. I can see how well you're doing. He sighed. It only seems that way. For example, we're already starting to produce our own products. We should drive around to the neighboring villages and towns and see what the markets are like. My father wants us to be known and recommended by all the neighbors. We could just go to town, take everything to the supermarkets, but he doesn't want to do that. What's the problem? Lisa didn't understand. I don't know where to go. How do I talk to people? Who will want to buy my milk? Lisa smiled. Good thing you talked me into buying a cradle then. Help me get it out. Let's go introduce you to the neighborhood. Thomas raised his eyebrows. What did you have in mind? Take as many milk bottles as you can carry. We'll go to all the strategic points. Let people taste, compare, recognize. Thomas didn't recognize Lisa. She was busily packing a bag for her son, where she had put diapers and warm clothes, a bottle and a pacifier just in case. Okay, he said and went to load the milk bottles. Lisa quickly made an itinerary in her head. They started from their village. They left a few bottles at one store. Did they give it away for free? Her friend asked doubtfully. Yes, Lisa said fervently. Sure, tell them it's from our farm. And it's free if they leave a detailed review. Cindy rolled her eyes. Yeah, do they know what a review is? To say whether it tasted good or not. Do you like the smell of the consistency and stuff? Did you gain weight? Lisa, Oak, don't worry, everyone will report back. Then they went to a bigger village where there was a small market. There Lisa started an activity. She bought a lot of disposable cups and organized a sampling. Everyone could come and taste the milk. There were a lot of people. How was it? Lisa asked. Yeah, it's okay, I guess. You'd buy it. Why wouldn't we? Thomas was surprised. Lisa could easily communicate with the locals, and they were friendly, curious. Interesting events didn't happen to them very often, so an event like this caught their attention. Their milk company rode around until the evening. Finally, they gave away the last bottle of milk. Oh, I'm tired, said Thomas. I admitted to Lisa, too. And Nick is doing great. They both looked at the cradle. The baby calmly consulted it. A perfect character the man has, said Thomas. I hope it stays that way. He also likes your voice. He does? Thomas was surprised. Yes, I noticed a long time ago that when you talk, he acts calm. What can I read in fairy tales? That's what Lisa mentioned. I have a session starting next week. Thomas nodded. Don't worry, we've already talked it over with your mom. I can take you to town to hang out with Nick while you take the exam, and then I can take you back. Thomas, I can't ask you to do that, and don't ask me to do that. I've made up my mind. You've got your own stuff to do. It's all bullshit. Lisa sighed. Thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you. Do I ever pay you back in kind? He smiled. You already do. You mean today? Sure. Lisa waved her hand. It's nothing. Not to me it isn't. I'm just glad I could help you. I'm offering you a position in our firm. Lisa raised her eyebrows. You'll be in charge of promoting our milk and everything else. What are we gonna have? I don't know how to. I don't have a degree. Yes, you do. Did you do something today? Something I would never have thought of with my education. Lisa smiled. Well, to be fair, it was your dad who came up with it. It will be cool to have your products consumed by all the people in the surrounding villages. It was an idea, and you started it. Okay, let's just say that everyone's doing a good job. You know, I'm always happy to help you for free. He used his head. We'll come back to this conversation. As Thomas promised, he drove Lisa to every credit, every exam, and walked Nick, while the baby's mom passed. Well, asked Thomas, every time she left the university, did Lisa take the test or did she pass? Congratulations. Lisa would laugh and Thomas would add, turning to the baby. Our mommy's smartest Lisa was indignant every time. She realized that from the outside they looked like a happy family, and she sometimes caught herself thinking that she wished they really were. But each time she kept repeating the same phrase to herself, and each time it hurt more when she said it. But it's better to let it be than to give herself false hopes. Thomas is a wonderful man, the best man in the world, but she, Lisa, is no match for him. She's just a stupid, uneducated girl with a baby in her arms. Why would he want her? After a while, he got her to take a job with him. She was mainly engaged in promotion of products, farms in her native area, and worked with the locals who got a job here, as it was supposed to be. Those didn't immediately realize that John wasn't to be trifled with. He did not forgive drunkenness, absenteeism, tardiness, and theft. For this reason, more than half of the hired workers were fired in the first month. But those who stayed learned their lesson. The pay was high. The working conditions were luxurious, and all the villagers were eager to get a job on a farm or a sap. But it was Lisa who put in a good word for us, the laid-offs. We'll be punks, honestly. I'll talk, but I won't promise anything, Lisa said. She talked to John. What do you think? Should we give them a second chance? He asked gawkily, looking at Lisa. She shrugged her shoulders. It's up to you. Handed him a list of those who were eager for a second chance, said John. I don't even know, let me see. Suddenly, Wendy intervened in the conversation. She quietly came up behind him and gently put her palm on the man's shoulder. He cautiously covered her hand with his fingers. Sure, honey, look. Wendy ran her eyes over the list. James can be brought back, she said. He's a man smart and sleight of hand, and he won't miss out on his profits. Why was he fired? Tried to steal government property, John said. Wendy nodded. If he realizes that it's more profitable to work honestly, he'll never steal anything again. He worked at a sawmill in the neighborhood until it went bankrupt. The conditions are better here, and you won't have to spend so much time traveling. All right, said John. What do you think of Betty? Wendy sighed. She's a good cook, but she'll always be late. Never wakes up before 12 o'clock. I thought everyone in the village was early. That's a misconception. I'll be aware of that. The production is increasing, Wendy added. She could be put on the second shift. All right, we'll keep that in mind. What about these two? Fired for drinking. Wendy shook her lips. I can't say anything good about them. There's no way to stop them from drinking. The only thing I can say is they can stay sober for a while. So if you've got a simple full-time job, you could try them there. 1 week on, 1 week off. Okay, I'll think about it. Lisa looked at them with a smile. How had her mother transformed herself after she had allowed herself to admit that John liked her? She had been afraid to tell Lisa. The daughter had to start the conversation herself. Wendy ended up crying and said she was afraid of her mom's judgment of her. Come on, Lisa said, you have no idea how happy I am for you. I'm scared, daughter, quietly said Wendy. After all these years, her mother reproachfully told her, Lisa, didn't you teach me that you should think about your own happiness if you think it's possible? Maybe it's worth taking the risk. Wendy looked at her daughter and smiled. When did you have time to grow up and become so wise? Lisa smiled back. Perhaps it's because I was raised by two of the most wonderful, wisest women in the world. Another thing Wendy was afraid of was Anna's judgment. After she began her relationship with John, she came to talk to her mother-in-law about it. She calmly listened to her and said, John, I have long loved you as my own daughter. I liked you the first day Sebastian brought you to meet you. While you were married, I couldn't be happy for my son. It seemed unreal to me that he could have met such an amazing girl. Honestly, at first I kept looking for a catch in you. I thought you couldn't possibly be such an amazing man. And then I fell in love with you. And then I was born a lesbian. And there was no happier person in the world than me. Anna paused, took out a handkerchief, waved it at the running tears, then gently took her sister-in-law's hand when Sebastian died. At first I thought my life was over too, but I had you tears. I forced myself to live, to take care of you. And as the years went by, I grew to love you even more. You became my daughter, and now I can't imagine my life without you. And of course, I want you both to be happy. I see what you've become lately. And what's that? Wendy asked, embarrassed. Your mother-in-law smiled, as if you had woken up after years of sleep like a flower that had been lying frozen for a long time. And now the years have melted the ground has thawed, and the flower has bloomed again. That's a beautiful comparison. Well, that's how I see it. And I'd like to see my daughter like that forever. Tears sprang from Wendy's eyes too. The women embraced. Little Nick grew up. And toward the middle of the summer came the day when Lisa decided for the first time to leave him with his mother for a long time. She herself had to go to the city, sign the documents at the university, confirming that she had successfully transferred to the second year, and take literature for independent study. Lisa also wanted to visit her dorm room, to pick up some things. Thomas, who also had his own things to do in the city, drove her there. "I'll probably be later than you," he said guiltily. "That's all right. I'll find something to do," Lisa smiled. "Wait for me in the dormitory." Lisa quickly finished her business and decided to visit the dean of the faculty. She had some free time. "Oh, Matviva, hello," Lisa said shyly. "Do you remember me?" Jenna smiled. How could she? Such students should be remembered. "I've been looking at your transcripts. Congratulations on a successful session." "Thank you." Chuckles. "You take your time." Lisa shrugged. "I don't think so." "Then have tea with me. It would be my pleasure." The dean stood up and turned on a clear electric kettle, peppermint tea. "You like it?" "Yeah, that's great, because I love it too." Jenna placed a cup in front of Lisa, hot flavored tea, and a vase of candy. "Who is your son, Nick? Congratulations from the bottom of my heart." "Thank you so much. How are you coping?" "I'm doing fine." The woman looked at her carefully. "That's how you answer everything. But feel free to be honest. If it's within my power, I'll try to help." Lisa gave her a warm smile. "Thank you for being so helpful, but I'm really doing well. My mom and grandmother are helping me, and I have a close friend who won't leave me either." A sly twinkle flickered in the dean's eye. "Just a friend." Lisa felt herself blush. It was only the second time she had interacted with Jenna, but whether it was the local tea, or the kind tone of her conversation partner, or the fact that she was tired of keeping it all to herself, she wanted to be frank. "Well, I'm just a friend to him, and he's more than that to me. Only he doesn't realize it." Jenna raised her eyebrows, drank from her cup, and set it carefully on the saucer. "Pardon my curiosity, but what does he do for you in terms of just friendship?" she asked. Lisa shrugged. "Gives me a job. Helps with the baby. Always willing to help. Drove me here from the village for all my credits and exams. I know I can ask him anything, and he won't say no." The dean smiled slyly. "It seems that what you're describing goes far beyond simple friendship," she remarked. Lisa blushed, lowered her head, and shook her head desperately. "No, he says so himself." "Have you ever shown him how much he means to you?" "No, have you?" "Where is he?" "Where am I?" Jenna furrowed her brow. "What's that supposed to mean?" Lisa bit her lip. She was already regretting having started this conversation. But it was too late to back out. He is handsome, rich, successful, very smart, and kind, and from a completely different social group. "Why would he want someone like me?" "Like what?" asked Jenna. "A young, beautiful, intelligent, wonderful girl." Lisa sighed, a first-grade absentee from the village with a baby in her arms. The dean rolled her eyes. "Oh, what kind of a child are you yourself, Lisa?" "A man would never spend that much energy and time on a girl who only has friendly feelings. I'm sure he's secretly in love with you. Except that he's afraid to make the first move, because you keep him at a distance." Lisa blushed. "I'm not sure that's possible." The dean smiled. "That's the wrong thing to say. You need to have more faith in your own abilities. I see your great potential, and I'm probably not the first. Who's telling you that? Please don't let yourself think you're inferior or unworthy." Jenna Lisa didn't leave Jenna Lisa's office until an hour later. They talked about a lot of things. After that, the girl, as planned, went to the dormitory. Her roommates had already left for their hometowns, and the room was quiet, empty, and dusty. Lisa went through her things, took a couple notebooks with notes, looked at her watch. There was still plenty of time left. She found among her things a book she had bought a long time ago, but had forgotten about it. She immersed herself in reading. The book was already finished, and there was still more than an hour to go before the meeting with Thomas. Lisa opened a map on her phone and saw that it would take about 40 minutes to walk from her dormitory to his office. And there was a park on the way. She texted Thomas and told him to take a walk. She'd be at his office at the appointed time. She wanted to call him instead, but decided she didn't want to distract him. She checked that everything was in order in the room and went out, remembering to lock the door. Thomas was immersed in his work with his head. He tried not to be distracted by outside stimuli. He wanted to finish his work early, so he could pick up Lisa as soon as possible. Maybe they could even stop for a bite to eat. Strange, they hadn't seen each other for a few hours and he already missed her. Maybe they could try to talk tonight. Tell her he can't take it anymore. That maybe she'd give him a chance. I'm scared. What if she says no? What if she's embarrassed to say no? At least they have this friendship between them now. He can see her every day, talk to her about everything. She laughs at his jokes, cooks meals with him. When he comes to visit, she trusts him completely. Suddenly, after his vacation, he will be deprived of that. Finally, the work was finished. He glanced at his watch. It was getting late. Lisa must have faltered by now. He picked up his phone to call her, apologize, and tell her he was on his way. The screen glowed with unread messages from Lisa. Thomas opened it and went cold. Hi, I'm bored sitting in my room. I thought I'd walk to your office. There's a park on the way. I'll walk there for a while, but I'll be waiting for you on the bench outside the office by the time you say. Kisses, Lisa. The park she was about to walk through didn't have the best reputation. It wasn't exactly a park. It was more like an abandoned forest in the middle of the city. The trees hadn't been trimmed in years. The paths hadn't been cleared even on a sunny day. It was dark, and many alcoholics, drug addicts, and other dubious personalities chose this park as a place for their gatherings. It was certainly no place for a young, attractive girl. Thomas rushed out of the office like a scalded man. Without waiting for the elevator, he ran down the stairs, nearly slipping on the steps they had just taken. Leaped past the astonished security guard into the street. The bench where Lisa was supposed to be sitting stood empty. He ran to the car, taking the route she was supposed to take. He looked carefully at the rare passersby, trying to find a small female figure with a mop of red hair, but there was no one like Lisa here. Thomas cursed himself with the last words, why he had missed her messages, why he had not foreseen that she would get bored and walk. He was supposed to keep her safe from all the bad things in this world. If anything happened to Lisa now, he would never forgive himself. Finally, Thomas reached the park, jumped out of the car, and ran towards it. There were a bunch of teenagers, dog owners with their happy pets. Slightly staggered, studious, untidily dressed men, Thomas ran all the way through the park. Lisa was nowhere to be found. Suddenly, he realized it was okay to call her. It was strange why such a simple thought had not occurred to him before. Probably it was all the fear for her that had completely shut off his brain. He dialed her number with trembling hands. There were long beeps. Thomas listened. Somewhere not too far away from him, behind the bushes, a gentle ringing melody was echoing. That was it. It was her phone. Like a wild animal, he rushed to the sound, ready to fight the dozens of hooligans surrounding her. Lisa scrambled around in her bag, trying to retrieve what had fallen to the very bottom. Phone nearly screamed in fear when a tall black shadow jumped out at her from somewhere behind the bushes. Are you trembling? She asked, recognizing her friend, Lisa. He exhaled hoarsely, grabbing her hands. Thomas' face was a pale bandage streaming lines of sweat. His chest and the back of his shirt were wet too, as if he'd been running away from someone. The boy was breathing hard, but there was relief on his face. What's wrong? Careful, Lisa asked. He breathed often and deeply, gradually calming down. I was so scared for you, Thomas said at last. I thought something had happened to you. Only now Lisa realized that it must have been a long time ago. Oops, guilty, she said. I'm sorry. I was supposed to wait for you outside the office, and it's so nice here. I was out and about, and I forgot about the time. Then I saw the squirrels and went to look at them. Okay, suddenly he looked at her strangely. Yes, Lisa confirmed, perplexed. He grinned and suddenly drew her to him, hugged her tightly. Did you scare me to death? She felt nice and warm in his arms. She didn't want to go anywhere. Why were you scared? She asked. Thomas sighed, as if he had to explain something too obvious. Are you still asking? He muttered. A young, beautiful girl, alone in the park in the evening. I'm not alone. The place is full of people. Thomas rolled his eyes and sighed, I don't have the energy to argue with you. Come on, let's go. They walked along the paths of the park toward the car. Each of them had a lot of questions on their minds, but neither of them dared to start a conversation. How are you doing at the university? Thomas asked, when they drove home, to break the silence. Good, Lisa replied. I have been successfully accepted into the second year. Congratulations. Thank you. Silence again. Thomas suddenly heard her breathing noisily and heavily. He glanced over and saw that her cheeks were flushed. You're all right, very softly, he asked. But Lisa hesitated. She waited a few seconds and in a strange voice said, Imagine, Jenna, my dean of the faculty, told me an amazing thing today. Thomas didn't understand anything, but just in case he nodded and clarified what we were talking about. It was unexpected. Oh, wow, yeah, Lisa sighed noisily again. I said I have a wonderful friend who does everything for me. Thomas hooked his fingers into the steering wheel so that his knuckles popped. Yeah, kind of dry, he confirmed. Do you have a friend like that? Lisa, not taking her gaze off his hands, continued Jenna. She told me it doesn't work that way, that a friend just wouldn't do that much. He pressed his lips together. Well, it's now or never in as calm a voice as possible, he said. I think your dean is a very smart woman. Lisa blushed. It even seemed to him that it got hotter in the car. But the girl said nothing, and he continued. You are more than a friend to me. I have loved you, Lisa, for a long time. Lisa lowered her eyes and said quietly, Why didn't you ever tell me that before? He shrugged his shoulders. How, if you keep saying that I'm just a friend to you, I didn't want to impose my love on you. She coughed, unconvinced, and said, I thought you were the one who keeps saying I'm just a friend to you. He froze, digesting what he'd heard in his head, then turned the wheel sharply to the side, and the car came to a stop on the side of the road. Thomas looked her straight in the face, as if trying to read her thoughts. What does that mean, Lisa? She took a deep breath, squeezed her eyes shut, then made up her mind. She opened her eyes and looked at him. You're more than a friend to me, too. I love you, Lisa. His heart pounded frantically. Thomas laughed. How stupid are you and I? Before Lisa knew it, he had already wrapped his hands around her face and kissed her passionately and tenderly. It was decided to have the wedding at the end of August. The days were very warm then. We have good young people, Anna said. The nomadic great-grandson's hands were not harmful. Usually at this time, and the first frosts will already hit. And in the daytime it rains or winds, and here it's warm as in the middle of summer. Yes, Wendy said with a smile. They're good. When did you and John get married? Slyly asked her mother-in-law. Wendy blushed. What's the hurry? They are the young ones, but slyly said Anna. We have everything ready, asked Wendy. Moving on to the current topic, the women must have raised their heads because they heard the door creak open. John walked into the yard. So my good ones. He turned to Anna and Wendy. We're all set. No guests yet. Oh, like they have a long drive. I don't like it when they're late. I know, sweetheart, but it's still half an hour away. The reception was right in the village. The registrar said it was her most unusual wedding ever. They organized the celebration in a large open meadow, which was right on the edge of the village. There they put tables, chairs, and a huge wicker arch decorated with wildflowers. Lisa was dressed in a light, woven lace dress. Her hair was loose and only slightly up. You don't need much color either, said Cindy, who was the hairdresser and makeup artist for the day. A little emphasize your big eyes and eyelashes, and it will be perfect. Lisa smiled. I am so glad to have you with me on this day. Her friend's eyes rounded in surprise. How could I not be? You're my best friend. You're mine too. Really? Cindy smiled slyly. And I thought you'd consider Thomas a friend to the last. Lisa laughed. Oh, come on. I'm not going to stop teasing you with this. He's good too, though. Okay, this is as good as it gets. Better, yes. Cindy finished her makeup, stood up and admired her creation. Are you perfect? Lisa looked in the mirror. You're a magician, Cindy. It's not hard to be when the sun is so beautiful. The marriage ceremony was a success. The villagers froze as they listened to the registrar's sonorous, deep voice, speaking of love and family. I agree, Lisa replied. At the questions directed to her, looked at her former best friend and now husband. Agreed, said Thomas. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Solemnly said the registrar and added more softly, you may kiss each other. Some of the guests shouted bitterly and bitterly from all sides. Of course they kissed. After a few minutes, everyone went to the table. The traditional village wedding began, the loaf was broken, songs were sung, toasts were made. I was afraid when I imagined how it would go quietly, Lisa said in her husband's ear. Why? He asked in surprise. Don't you know what? I don't. Sorry, I don't have much experience with rustic weddings, so it's hard to guess. I was expecting something. Lisa sighed, fighting. The husband laughed. How could I not have guessed, of course? But so far, everything seems to be going well. I hope so. Well, if anything, we've got a couple of employees here who have shifts tomorrow. So they're not drinking tonight, so they'll help out in case there's a problem. Oh, right, I forgot. Lisa smiled. Did you and your father manage to break the village system? Not us, but the strict rules and decent working conditions. They talked as easily and calmly as they always seemed to. Nothing had changed in their lives since their marriage. They could talk to each other just as easily and casually, perhaps because they were so infatuated with each other. That's why they didn't notice the atmosphere had changed. Look who's coming. One of the guests exclaimed in a loud whisper. A stream ran by. The guests began to look closer. After a while, Lisa and Thomas realized that something was going on. A man was walking towards their clearing. It was a man in a military uniform. Judging by his staggered, steady gait, he was drunk. His face was red and his hands were clenched into fists. You shouted loudly, he shouted, pointing his finger at Lisa. She froze. At first second, she didn't realize who this man was. But when she saw his fierce gaze, it gradually dawned on her. Ethan asked her in surprise, and stood up. She didn't wait. Ethan was shaking. He seemed ready to pounce on her. How could you? It's only been a year and you're already married. And you swore to me you loved me. Bitch. Thomas stood up and walked away. He said in a calm voice, looking Ethan straight in the eye. The man hummed and looked at him. You're the groom then, the husband. Ethan nodded. Even so. I know about you, rich boy. I didn't deny it, Thomas. So you sold out for money. Ethan turned to Lisa. She could feel the bitterness in her mouth now. Did she really ever really love him? Apologized to her. Also calmly said Ethan that one. People are kind. Look at this. He turned to all the guests. Everyone looked at it differently. Some with fear, some with curiosity. John sat tense, ready to stand up for his son at any moment. He was held back only by Wendy, who gently placed her palm on his boss. Don't worry, in a whisper, one of the workers told him. We won't let him ruin the wedding. If he throws into a fight immediately on the ground, hit us with a twist. Vasily felt a little calmer, and Ethan continued. Gone. So you were only in the army for a year. I thought my faithful girl would wait for me, but there she was. Not even a few months later, and she's already having an affair with someone else. The guests started to murmur. Thomas wanted to leave the table, but Lisa gently took his hand. It's all true, she said calmly. Ethan hadn't expected this and was silent for a few seconds. She continued, I was in love with you. That summer I thought we were serious. We were, Ethan shouted. But there was less confidence in his voice. Lisa nodded contentedly and continued. And then I found out that I wasn't your only girlfriend. The women at the table gasped, and then I heard one of them whisper loudly, yes. Everyone said he was a womanizer. Lisa smiled. I also know you have a woman, the two children at the tables murmured. Ethan didn't seem to know where to take his eyes. He clearly hadn't expected Lisa to know that. I wrote you a letter, asking you to explain yourself, but you didn't answer me. After that, you dared to come to my wedding and make claims. She stopped talking. There was silence. Everyone looked at Ethan. He looked around fearfully, apparently expecting some kind of support. But everyone around him was looking at him with disapproval. You should get out of here, one of the guests said contemptuously. What the hell are you up to? A woman shouted indignantly. You're not worth her little finger. Shouted a third person. Get out of here. Take your wife and children to the village, and don't forget to visit your other women. Voices rumbled from all sides. The guests stood up ready with determination, but to protect the bride and to escort out the guest who hadn't been abandoned. Oh, come on, shouted Ethan, and ran off in the direction of the village. A few men followed him. John looked at the laborer who was calming him down. They're not going to hit him. He smiled. What's the matter with you? Just a little? Seeing the stern look of the supervisor, he sighed and stood up. All right, I'll go and see that they don't overdo it. Come on, kid, said Daddy. Lissa said affectionately. Her son raised his head at her and looked at her with shiny round eyes. Pausing, Lissa repeated. Thomas grinned. He was sitting at the opposite end of the long, fluffy rug, with the baby sitting in the center of it. Call him out, demanded Lisa. Thomas smiled at his son. Come to me, he said and waved his arms. The baby looked at him interestedly, thought for a moment, and then crawled toward him. Wow, Lisa gasped. Thomas laughed. Wait, you'll see something else. The child crawled briskly to his father, who was sitting on the carpet, and placed his small hands on his knees. He didn't do that when I was there, Lissa said quietly, afraid of scaring him off. In the meantime, the son had already climbed up and finally stood on his feet. Thomas, of course, helped him by supporting him with his arms. But still the little one stood on his feet almost on his own. That's what we learned while you were practicing, Thomas said. We wanted to surprise you, and you did. She got up, walked over to her husband and son, and sat down next to them, then hugged them both. The son was pretty stoked. He smiled. Okay, Mommy, let's go to Grandma and Grandpa's. Yes, said Lisa, as if waking up. We have to help them set the table. They came out of the house. Thomas was holding his son in his arms. It wasn't far to the neighbors. Oh, here we are at last. Where's my youngest great-grandson? It was Grandma Anna's voice. She appeared in the doorway and took little Grisha from his father's arms. And where is my eldest? Asked Thomas. Yes, here I am, Dad. Towards them jumped out a boy of about 5 years old. My grandfather and I were playing chess, he reported cheerfully. Thomas patted Nick on the head. Wow, and I only started playing chess with him when I was 12. What's the use? John's voice came from the back of the house. You still don't know how. But my grandson has obvious talent. Lissa smiled and gave her husband's hand a reassuring squeeze. Boys, stop fighting harshly, said Wendy, appearing in the doorway. She had a hand on her large belly, and seeing it, Lisa smiled again. Come on, Mom, I'll help you. The women walked into the kitchen. How are you feeling? Lisa asked. Wendy shrugged her shoulders. I'm fine. Of course, it was easier with you. What's wrong? Concerned? Asked the daughter. Wendy laughed. No, don't be worried. The pregnancy is going well. Of course, it's a lot easier at 20 than when you're in your 40s. You're doing great, Lisa said and kissed her on the cheek. Wendy is born, by the way, said Anna, coming into the kitchen. You and John went to town today. What did they say at the ultrasound? Wendy smiled at the girl. Well, finally. Chorus exclaimed mother-in-law and daughter. Or else you'll go crazy with these boys. Added already twice great-grandmother Anya. Wendy laughed. John also said that he was counting on a girl. And you yourself. She shrugged her shoulders. I'd be happy either way. But it would probably be easier with a daughter. All right, Anna said. So far, all 4 boys have found something to occupy themselves with. Let's cook. Yes, said Lisa. It's 8 o'clock. Then the women concentrated for a while on washing and cutting vegetables, shaping the turkey, arranging the fruit in a large vase, chilling the champagne, and other pre-New Year's chores. Wendy was the first to break the silence. Do you remember, she said, how we welcomed all our New Year's just a few years ago? Anna smiled. Of course we do. Always the 3 of us in your little house. Lissa joined in the reminiscing. Grandmother always baked honey cake, also pies with cabbage and potatoes. She'd come over in the evening. My mom and I were already chopping salads, stuffing chicken, boiling potatoes. You always helped us. Then by 12 we sat at the table, congratulated each other, exchanged gifts, then went out and watched the fireworks that the neighbors launched. We come home and change the channels. We find a good movie and watch it until the wee hours of the morning. Grandma used to stay with us until morning, Lisa said. I loved it so much. On January 1, we would get up late and have tea with grandmas and cakes and cake. 3 generations of women looked at each other with a smile. The kitchen was warm and cozy. I couldn't have thought then that in a few years our family would be so big, Wendy said. Anna smiled. I am very happy for you, my favorite girls. And now that I have 2 great-grandchildren and another granddaughter will be born in a few months, I just enjoy every day. I'm very happy too, Lisa said. The meal was ready in an hour, but ready to go. Peeked into the kitchen. Thomas is almost there. Lisa turned to him. We're starving, her husband informed her. He's going to swallow it, Grandma sighed. Come on, help. I'm ready. Me too. Nick appeared at the door. The whole bunch of them began carrying plates of food into the living room, where the fireplace was already stoked. There was a decorated Christmas tree and a table covered with a white or Nina tablecloth. However, the table was vacated only by John because he was holding his youngest grandson in his arms. Finally, everyone sat down at the table. The men loudly paid tribute to the delicious food and praised the women. John was the first to stand up. I would like to make the first toast. I am grateful to this year for everything that has happened. In general, I have no reason to complain about life. He looked around at everyone present and smiled. I have a wonderful son, a wonderful daughter-in-law, and 2 beloved grandchildren. And of course, the most beloved woman in the world, with whom we will soon have a daughter. And of course, Anna, who is the best mother-in-law in the world. Anna smiled. This year has brought me a lot of happiness, as well as all the previous ones. And I hope to have even more beautiful, bright days in the future. Hooray! Thomas shouted. Hooray! Caught up with the rest of the table, they continued to sit, drink, eat, congratulate each other. Closer to 12, John got up. Where are you going, grandfather? Nick asked in surprise. John stretched and yawned old. I started to sleep. Shall I go? Shouted the eldest grandson. Santa Claus is coming soon. You'll miss everything. Grandfather sadly spread his hands. Well, what can I do? Tell me about him in the morning. Okay, sighed Nick. Go to sleep. Grandfather nodded and went to his room. Grisha seems to be falling asleep already too, said Lisa. I'll go, leaving him. She quietly left the room. And when Santa Claus is already coming? Asked Nick. Grandma seriously looked at the clock 15 minutes later. The grandson suddenly squinted slyly. How do you know that? Anna was not the least bit embarrassed. He comes to us every year. We have an agreement, and I do not remember. Last year, you were already asleep then, Thomas explained. Okay. Nick pressed his lips together and asked another question. How does Santa Claus fly around in one night? Magic. Anna also answered confidently. Just at that moment, there was a knock on the door. It was he who shouted to Nick, Come look. The boy rushed to the door, and the adults, smiling, moved after him. Lisa came out of the room, putting Grisha down, and joined the others. Well, hello, Nick. A man's bass sounded from the hallway. You waited for me? Yes, happily replied the boy. That's good. Santa Claus. Shook from the snow, patted his mittens, and sat down on a chair in the hallway. So tell me, how have you been this year? Good. Nick answered confidently. I go to the kindergarten preparatory group. I also help my dad and grandpa on the farm. I also help my mom with my little brother. My grandmother taught me to read, and my great-grandmother and I bake pies together. Santa Claus smiled affectionately. And that's good. I can see that you are a good boy. Here's a present for you for that. He pulled a big box out of a huge red sack. Thank you, Santa Claus. Then the child thought for a moment and added, Why don't you stay and have tea with us? Because you must be tired. I'd be glad to. Nick, I can't. Grandpa has a lot of things to do. Goodbye. Soon after the wizard left the table, John returned. I've had a good night's sleep, he announced cheerfully, and it's time to exchange gifts. The eldest grandson looked at him suspiciously, but said nothing. Santa Claus already gave me a present, he announced. You can take it from here. Lisa sat on her husband's lap and hugged his neck with a smile, looking at this picture. Your father really is a wizard, isn't he? She said thoughtfully. Thomas raised his eyebrows. Why is that? If he hadn't thought of moving to our village then, none of this would have happened. Thomas nuzzled his nose into her shoulder and kissed her neck. Are you right? I hadn't thought of that before. Although I think there is such a thing as fate. Even if it wasn't, I'd still meet you someday. For example, years later Lisa grinned when I would be married to Ethan. Her husband frowned and wrapped his arms around her tighter. Not even mentioning that rascal. Just thinking about him makes me want to go to the next village and punch him in the face. Lisa said quietly, surprised by her husband's combative attitude. There is no need to go anywhere, especially on New Year's Eve. Okay, he quickly agreed then tomorrow. Even though Lisa knew he was joking, she didn't want to check it out. He'd moved a long time ago, I think, up north somewhere. Thomas raised his eyebrows. How did you know that? Wendy told me. Good. He hesitated a moment, but asked. He knows about Nick. Lisa sighed. Probably guesses it's the village after all. There are always rumors, but either he's not interested or he thinks you're the father. Her husband made her comfortable, wrapped his arms around her. I am Nicky's father, he said firmly, and I'm not giving him to anyone. Lisa felt that tears were about to come to her eyes and hit her face in the top of his head. Dad, a boy's voice came out. How does Santa Claus know I wanted a spaceship? He shipped the box with the construction kit. I only told you about it. Thomas shrugged. Well, I guess it's because he's a wizard. The son squinted suspiciously, okay, and scurried off to collect a new toy. He's getting too smart. He's growing up, said Thomas Lisa. Yeah, he'll figure it out next year. John and Wendy came up to them. But you were sure until you were 12 that Santa Claus was real, said John. But my grandson will be smarter. Oh, Dad, I'm not exaggerating until 11. Lisa guessed at 5, said Wendy with a smile. Of course, said Lisa. Because Santa Claus had Grandma's eyes and hands. Anna smiled. I don't think it matters so much to what age children believe in miracles. The main thing is to have loved ones around to give them those miracles. You're right as always, Wendy said. I didn't believe in miracles anymore, but John gave them to me. She looked at her husband, who shook his head. You were my miracle. He put his hand on her stomach. Let's have tea. Anna suggested. If it's with your cake, I will.
Subscribe and click the bell.
It was the first days of June 2002. There was a strong heat in the city. So many children seemed to be a yard on their own age yet unknown. Everywhere were running, jumping, and shouting, and with precise voices of kids of all different ages, somewhere in the garage, and stood guys, teenagers, discussing the failed Los Angeles Lakers game. What had been shown on First the day before. On the playground, there were loudly frolicking kids about 7 years old. Behind them walked an older girl with a businesslike look, constantly interfering in their children's games, so that they do not hurt each other. On the benches sat a company of guys by the look of middle school students, playing family, throwing to each other a red rubber ball. A homeless man shouted. One of the guys sharply threw the ball to his friend. There was general laughter. The children were so loud that the grandmothers of the neighboring benches, all this cacophony began to annoy. Get out of here, you fools. Aunt Wendy got up from the bench and approached the boys. What can't you see? There are small children playing here. The boys didn't calm down. They laughed at Tony, who had managed to marry an alcoholic and become homeless. Of course, it was all just play-by-play, but still so funny that the boys laughed at the firewood and their bellies, ignoring the indignant look on Aunt Wendy's face. Come on, Aunt Wendy. We're out of here, said Thomas, the rowdiest boy in the yard. Let's go. But what kind of words are you talking about? I'm going to talk to my mom. So I'm going to talk loud again. Thomas shouted after her. They're already leaving with their friends towards the garages. The noisy company left the yard. They were once again chased away for swear words and loud shouting by Wendy, the storm of the yard and the head of the house. What are we going to do? Guys, Thomas asked the boys. "Let's go to the stone field," said Will. "Well, we'll decide on the way," answered Thomas. The boys went and hung around the neighborhood in search of entertainment, which of course they arranged for themselves. But whatever they did on those hot summer days, they were the happiest kids in the world. After all, it was vacation, which meant it was freedom. The summer sky was slowly changing just as it was getting darker and darker. And yet, even at 8 o'clock plus in the evening, it was still quite bright. Not even 200 hours ago. The courtyard was full of children, hence the noise, the shouting, and the life. Now there were only 2 women, one of whom was Wendy, and 2 girls about 8 years old. They often stayed out late. The girls could sometimes go home at 11 o'clock p.m. And their names were Kate and Daria. They became friends, as if, somewhere in their subconscious, they felt they had a similar misfortune, a misfortune. That was dysfunction. The girls grew up in families with parents, alcoholics, who almost did not work, and without bread to water at the expense of handouts from the state, and money on loan from relatives and buddies of drinking buddies. And if Kate and parents were quiet and phlegmatic, and drunkards, then Dad and Mom Daria knew the whole yard. They loved to organize scandals in the yard so that everyone could hear their profanity. It was quite a spectacle for the neighbors. Most of them looked out of their windows and balconies in a civilized manner. Well, rare people tried to take away the grief of the spouses. One such brave woman was Wendy. She considered it a necessity to observe the situation in the place where children walked and adults rested. Often she had to contend with identified alcoholics. In the middle of the night, who decided to have a heart-to-heart talk with their friends. She also dealt with suspicious teenagers who came to lounge on the benches. And she was the one who kicked out the screamers and scandalizers, disturbing people's sleep the night before another workday. She was grateful, of course, but at the same time few people even tried to help Wendy. Wendy would discuss with the neighbors these 2 girls lonely away from other children and playing in the yard until late at night. This fact disliked and frightened her, but she didn't know how to help the little ones, or what to do with them. What if a maniac showed up here? She looked at Kate and Daria on the swings, sharing her worries with her neighbor Lucy from the second entrance. Lucy was indifferent to the late-night outings of other neighbors' children. Indifferent where? "Oh, come on. It's not like you're posting." Exhaling smoke from a cigarette, grinned Lucy. "Oh, enough of me for all the manky. There are little girls hanging around, with their clothes and holes all over the place." She was indignant. "Look at the ballerinas. Look at Jacob. When was the last time they were sober?" Wendy took a deep puff and looked at the card with a sad smile. "Beautiful girl, so kind, so good. How could she be? Well, why do you look at these faces? Such to be certainly will not want to be," answered Lucy. "It's time for bed," said Wendy. As usual, she went to the girls and asked them if it was time to go home. The kind-hearted woman realized that chasing the girls home to their inebriated and therefore inadequate parents was not the right thing to do. But it was at the same time the least evil of the 2 options available to them at the moment. Either Kate and Daria waited until it was so deep into the night, when their parents would normally be asleep, but risked running into dangerous people on the street. Or they come early and run into drunken profanity at best, but were still relatively safe. Such alternatives for little innocent creatures, upsetting Wendy almost every day, but there wasn't much more she could do for them. The next day, the yard was again full of workers. In it, as on a large theater stage, were lined up the usual mise-en-scene for those who liked to look out the window. Grandmothers were still sitting on the bench, teenagers were gathering near the garages, and on the playground small noisy children were playing. Even this noise had long been familiar to those around them. Another unpleasant incident disrupted all this order. It was not uncommon here. Maria ran into the yard, a girl of about 12 from a dysfunctional family. She was followed with heavy steps by a large, red-haired, short-cropped woman of about 50 years old. She was clearly angry, her cheeks red with anger and her eyes bulging. Said it all about her emotional state. These sounds, remotely resembling words, came out of her mouth and traveled all over the yard. A deaf mute lived nearby. Her name was Molly, She was often teased by the local boys, and some of them threw stones at her. That day she had a problem with Maria. For the girl immediately interceded local grandmothers, trying to stop angry Molly. But at the counter, the older women lashed out at the deaf-mute. She first waved away, pushed their hands away, but then, saying something incomprehensible, sat down on a bench and calmed down. She took a breath. Still, the grandmothers came closer to her. They saw Molly crying quietly. "Come on, scratch the rivers." One of the old ladies came running in deaf and dumb. Molly sat on the bench for a while, as if thinking about something, took her dark blue cloth and her bag, which was almost empty. She took her dark blue and rag bag, which was almost empty, and went on her way. Girlfriends Kate and Daria watched this picture with horror. They then discussed Molly and Maria for a long time. What could she have so offended the poor invalid woman? The girls, like the grandmothers on the bench, were hardy creatures. They never liked it when the weak and unlikable were offended. And now they took pity on poor Molly, calling Maria a fool. The sun was shining brighter than usual. There were still many children, grandmothers, and adults on the streets, already having fun, singing alcoholic beverages, and not at all embarrassed by the large number of underage visitors to the palace. She could see the people of the playground and beyond from bottom to top. The girl was hanging from one of the yard turnstiles. It was one of her favorite things to do. Everything flipped upside down, giggling, she told her friend. Her blue t-shirt came down and distressed her small baby belly. "You can see the belly button," Daria laughed. "Mary on the turnbuckle." Kate was embarrassed and timidly took hold of the edges of the t-shirt and pulled it back up. Two little innocent angels were so carelessly playing and chatting about all sorts of silly things on the playground. And everyone had stopped their eyes on them at least once. They were cute, and at the same time in the eyes of these two beautiful creatures was already a lot of pain. And even a lot for 8-year-old girls. It was getting colder outside. A strong wind was falling. In a matter of minutes, the courtyard became completely quiet. Almost everyone had gone home. Thunder rumbled in the distance. On the bench sat a woman about 50 years old with bags. Probably found them from the store and sat down to rest. Daria and Kate were running around the yard, oblivious to the overcast weather and signs of an impending thunderstorm. The stranger on the bench was smiling, having watched the kids run around. The wind blew even harder. The sand soared into the sky. The girls squealed, "Oh," sand in the eye, straight shrieked. "Kate, I'm going home," replied her friend. She quickly ran towards her driveway, looking around. Kate noticed only now. There wasn't a soul in the yard. This had happened before. So the girl said to herself, "Well, here I am again alone here." The only one she noticed was some strange lady with bags. The girl decided to approach her. "Hello, do you need help carrying?" she asked the woman. "Oh, I can manage, my dear. What's your name?" answered the stranger Kate. "I'm Miranda." "Where do you live?" "I asked the children not far away. I was passing by your yard. Why aren't you home?" "Kate, look at the weather." The woman surprisingly quickly picked up the conversation with a strange child. While with interest, looking at her clothes, hands, facial features, the expression of her face from gloomy became smiling and interested. The girl was embarrassed. She was always trying to make conversation, so that it didn't descend into uncomfortable questions. Parents. And now, when asked about her reason for not wanting to go home, Kate sadly thought of making something up again. She had been silent for a long time, and Miranda, noticing this childish, innocent embarrassment, replied, "Why don't you go home? There's a big hurricane coming anyway. Look, the sand has already risen into the sky. I'm not afraid. A few years ago, when I was like 4, I was alone on the street and it started. Well, then they took me away, but I almost flew away." The girl talked animatedly about the events of that terrible storm. "Well, I immediately saw that you are a brave girl. Now run," Miranda replied. Her face broke into a smile of delight. "Okay," Kate replied cheerfully. She walked slowly towards her house. The wind was still blowing. After a few more minutes, it started pouring rain in the city. Kate's parents, Anna and Jacob, were total scandalous alcoholics. The family was on the books as a dysfunctional family, and everyone knew their situation. The father and mother were quite young, and I was 40 years old and Jacob was 42. In addition to Kate, there was a boy named Tim. Where was he? During the summer vacations, nobody knew his 14 years. Or rather knew, but only the same nobody needed wandering in the yards of his friends' teenagers. They would run around the garages, play soccer, and drink beer. Questioning the local strange man, Tony bought them a couple 3 cans of wine at the store. When Anna met Jacob, they were both quite decent people and didn't drink that much. But genetics took their toll. Jacob's father was a heavy alcoholic. He caught almost all his scandals and quarrels with his mother, and one day he began to turn into that man. Anna, being an orphanage child, and therefore having no family model in front of her eyes, began to degenerate as a person. At first she drank with her husband to get less drunk. Then she became addicted to alcohol. Having no higher education, they could not find a job that would suit them. And now every time one of them got a new job, not even a month passed before they were fired. So the family got used to living at the expense of the state, and especially kind relatives of the buddies would lend them money. One of such was Anna Lucy's sister. The woman worked as an accountant in a construction company and could afford to give her sister a few $100 a month to support her favorite nephews. Miranda began to frequent this noisy courtyard full of unusual personalities and noisy children. Sometimes she was on her way from the store, and sometimes she would just walk by, pictured there to sit and watch the summer's carefree bustle of kids. She walked around, yes, around inside her mind for a long time. But when once again she saw the shy blonde-haired girl, Kate, and her friend knew for sure she wanted to see her. And it wasn't just a feeling of pity for the neglected child. It was something more. Wendy liked to go out on her little balcony on the 3rd floor, where a cat with little purple flowers was tied up on ropes, and the wire was converted to a parapet by an ashtray that was a tin can of Sprat. From there, she watched the life of the neighbors and just smoked. On one of those lazy days when there was no reason to go outside and just didn't feel like it, Wendy saw Miranda. She remembered that she had seen her before. She didn't like her presence in the yard. She doesn't talk to anyone. She's weird. What's the point of being here at all? The woman thought. Miranda sat on a bench. She didn't have any shopping to do this time. She seemed to have come here purposefully. Coming here, for the umpteenth time, she had never struck up a conversation with anyone. And to some she had already managed to be attracted. Miranda called out to Kate. She recognized the familiar face and, leaving Daria alone, ran up to Miranda. "Oh, hello. Are you here again?" the girl said with a childish, naive smile. "I'm here a lot now. I come here maybe 5 times. I've already answered here. The new picture is familiar. Come in, you live nearby." "Yes, I do." "You haven't been around for a while, have you?" Kate was shyly silent. Miranda realized that she had hurt the girl and hurried to reassure her. "It doesn't matter." "Well, not important. So the business was important. And who do you live with? Do you have a husband?" Kate asked. "No, I don't have a husband." "And children?" "No kids either." Miranda gloomed a little, but not for long. Next to her, 20 centimeters away from her, sat a curious little beauty who was as interested in the life of her interlocutor as she was. "Kate, you tell me, what do you do? Are you out with a friend?" Miranda also already knew what the girl had to deal with every day, and she wasn't even a little bit honest with her. This wasn't the 5th time she'd come here to the yard. She had been coming here for 2 whole months. The woman wanted to hear and see the noise and the fun, the child. And if other adults sometimes resented such an environment for Miranda, this yard was a fairy tale. Except for the hair, the girl with the big blue eyes was only the 2nd time she'd seen it. Not much of anything. "I don't know." Kate hesitated, twirling a strand of her blonde hair around her finger. "Sometimes we run around the garages." "Oh, don't tell anyone." She covered her mouth with her hands, glanced confusedly at the woman across the garages, barely concealing her indignation, and interjected Miranda. "It's dangerous, Kate. My husband shouldn't, but Daria and I like it." "But she's not allowed," the girl replied. "And you?" I'm allowed to do anything." The girl grinned so uncharacteristically ironically for her age. Miranda felt uncomfortable. She realized, of course, what poor Kate was getting at. After that conversation, these two different souls became even closer. Every time a woman came into the yard, Kate would throw herself around her neck, screaming Miranda, and hugged her gently, asking about business. Miranda told her that she worked as a doctor in a private clinic, that she loved reading and traveling. Kate had never been farther than the nearest suburbs. She loved to listen to her new friend's stories about the pyramids of Egypt, the blue vast sea, and the big African elephant that dragged their fascinated passengers sitting in Hindi right on its own back. One such lively conversation Wendy overheard while standing on her favorite balcony with a cigarette. She realized that the girl's parents were probably in no condition to know about Kate's new friend, and felt it her duty to steer the woman away from the naive child. She saw Miranda as evil. One day, Wendy decided to talk to her. Kate was no longer in the yard. Miranda sat alone and stared at the burning windows of the houses. It was getting dark. She leisurely approached the bench where the stranger was sitting and addressed her. "Good evening." "Hello," Miranda replied. Wendy immediately there seemed to be consternation and uncertainty in her voice. That feeling was even stronger. Reinforced her suspicions. Nothing good about this woman, she thought. "Do you live here in these houses?" Wendy asked, a little farther away. "I like to vacation here." "Do you like the screams of our children?" Wendy laughed hostilely, sat down on the bench next to Miranda and smoked. "I like children. They don't annoy me," replied the stranger calmly. "Especially Kate. Do you like it?" The abrupt switch from you to you seemed to Miranda to show some hostility on the part of the interlocutor. "What do you want, woman?" "I'm just socializing with the kids. They come to me on their own. And, times are tough. And you know what, Kate, our kid, we're all watching her. And her parents are alcoholics. But we love that girl, and we're not gonna let her get hurt. I'm very happy for you. I don't know what you're getting at." Wendy was a fan of watching the news on TV on cold, cloudy days, when you did not want to go out, even to smoke on the balcony, often gained for his and hardships of the past, the heart and side pure. What is going on? At that time rare were news about pedophile maniacs, and people engaged in such black business as illegal transplantation, slavery, and drug business. All of these puzzles in her mind had formed an unpleasant picture. She was now more worried than ever about the fate of abandoned children like Kate and Daria. Wendy did not question Miranda. She felt it was her duty to declare her attitude toward the local children who were deprived of care and control from their parents. Yet after the conversation, she left the yard with mixed feelings. Or maybe really this woman was just a good-natured lover of children. But on the other hand, Wendy had seen a lot of things in her life, and once came to the conclusion that there is always evil everywhere and in everything. And now she did not understand the true intentions of the stranger, but as if she felt that there was something hostile in these intentions. Friday evening. It was as if there was a general picnic in the city. There were those who, without going out of town, even to the park, celebrated the beginning of the long-awaited weekend in the hot days right in their yards. The guests of our yard were no exception. Kebab cheerful and already a little tipsy. The crowd was making it right on the urn. Not too long ago painted bright green. Even though the time was no longer childish. There were still little kids running around the yard. They were the children of the very people who were making kebabs, heatedly discussing the latest news in the country and in their own yard. Is she the one who sat down? That's how he sat down. That's how he sat down again. Nick, what is it? Nick, what do the children want? That's about the kind of talk that came to innocent cats, little children. But they, being busy swinging on swings, running around and playing criminals, did not get into all the details of adult affairs. They only nodded among themselves when they heard swear words from drunken uncles and aunts. Kate was among these children. Her parents were very fond of summer vacations in the yard. One of the reasons for their addiction to such pastime was the most common laziness and impotence. Jacob and Anna did not like to go out for long periods of time beyond the yard or the grocery store, where they could buy inexpensive and tested alcohol. By 11 o'clock p.m., all the adults they noted Friday in the yard were pretty drunk. Their children were still out for a walk. They sat down on a separate empty bench and whispered anxiously about something, peering at the drunken groups of people they knew. Instead of cooking kebabs, it was noisier than it had been an hour ago. If the kids were quiet, the adults were louder, and it wasn't just talking. The guys, it was realized, were conflicted. The more alcohol these people put into themselves, the more they became bolder, more determined, and most importantly, more aggressive. Jacob was the one who yelled the most. He was hurt by the words of his friends, and he got into a fight with his fists. His wife Anna wanted to calm him down, but she realized that she could hardly stand on her feet, and she just did not have the strength to enter into the conflict between the men. Fortunately, this stormy dispute did not end in a fight. Jacob hysterically waved at his buddies, and Anna and Kate still stood for a long time. Sitting on the bench figures, urging to go home in the hands of the drunken father of the family was half-empty bottle, and he barely held it. The family's entreaties had no effect on Jacob, and he barely got up from the bench and headed deep into the houses unknown where and why. The next day, Kate was approached by a crowd of guys and girls about 12 or 13 years old. They smiled wryly, and some had embarrassment on their faces. "Kate, I think your dad's lying in the driveway," told my wife, and the others giggled that she didn't. She said thoughtfully and sadly, "Girl, yeah, there's your daddy lying drunk." Somebody in the crowd shouted, "Go look." Kate didn't go to the entrance of that house. She felt hurt and sad. It was shame for her own man. She was looked at and laughed at, jeered at, giggled at. And what was her fault? Toward her father, she developed a grudge that day, but she didn't know what to do with that feeling. Kate had hoped for years that things would change for the better in their family. She wanted to stop one day seeing those endless bottles of cigarette butts everywhere in the apartment. Kate wished that Tim's brother would spend less time with boys on the street. Wished they could all go to the movies together. Thought sometimes she was small, of course. The shy girl never shared her worries with her family or anyone else. The most painful thing for her was to see a prosperous mother and father walking with their children, daughter and son. She loved to observe such families closely, their habits, their gestures with a look. Somewhere subconsciously, she tried to understand what was wrong with her family. It is difficult for an 8-year-old child to make complex conclusions and philosophize about the causes of certain events that occur in life. Therefore, without drawing any conclusions, Kate continued to live as normal children live, playing with friends, studying at school, and of course, dreaming. 2 weeks passed. Miranda did not appear in the yard. Wendy was telling the local grandmothers about how they were taking her out of the yard. Kate was constantly disappointed, going all day in the yard and not meeting this mysterious Aunt Miranda, who, like a fairy godmother, came down to her from the fairy heavens. Only the girl got used to a new bright person in her life. How did this man disappear? For her, it was a betrayal. But one day she came lightly down on the bench, a skinny, tall woman in a long blue dress and with a bag in her hands, filled with groceries, and exhaled heavily, as if she had been carrying heavy weights all day. Kate, seeing her from afar, rushed towards the bench. There was no limit to the child's delight. "Miranda!" shouted the girl, and abruptly braked, lunged right at the woman. They embraced and began to share with each other the news of the past days. Wendy wasn't the only one. Many did not understand this strange friendship and considered the stranger, if not dangerous. For a girl, this is a very strange oddity. Miranda herself at first could not answer why she had formed a friendship with this little girl. But those thoughts of doubt were quickly transformed. A clear purpose. Kate was no longer so shy to talk about her feelings, about her attitude towards her parents, and how sometimes she had to be ashamed of them. She had long considered whether to tell her about the unpleasant event that had happened with her father, because she had never before wanted to bring out the dirt and be frank about her family. But now that she felt complete trust in Miranda, the language had unleashed itself. Miranda listened silently to Kate and asked her nothing, for fear of hurting or offending her in any way. And at the same time, she was a very attentive interlocutor. Kate sometimes wondered how she could remember such details of her stories. Such interest of her new friend bought the girl up. "Miranda, do you have a mother?" Kate asked her. Sometimes, as is often the case with young children, she asked her companion the most sudden questions that stumped her. "Yes, there is Kate. Why do you ask?" "No, I'm just asking." "It happens. I just wanted to know." Miranda was curious in this girl. Even the most seemingly insignificant things were said by this woodland creature. Not for nothing. And the woman began to slowly consider meeting her as fate. It happened one hot July afternoon. First, Daria friend Kate, which was not at all peculiar to her, walked in the yard alone. Local grandmothers were surprised by such an event. "Daria." Aunt Tanya called her. "Why are you walking alone?" "Kate, where?" "Kate wasn't here, I don't know." Finally, it got dark in the courtyard. Kate was gone. "I wonder where Kate is." Do she and Daria walk together all the time? Wendy wondered. "I don't know," replied Tanya. "Still, I'm worried." Wendy went home to the AG's house. Her heart was not in the right place. They didn't open the door right away. Anna stood in the hallway, in a green robe with her hair shot up. The picture before Wendy was not the prettiest. Empty vodka bottles were lying everywhere. Jacob was lying on the bed, unconscious. "Where are the children?" Wendy asked worriedly. I don't get it." Temka is in the room playing, sitting up, and the woman's petite face took on a completely different expression in an instant. She seemed to have remembered that she had a young daughter who didn't come home at 10 p.m. as usual. "She's not in the yard, Anna." "What yard?" "The time is 11 o'clock p.m., almost not anymore. She wasn't in the yard." For the first time in a long time, Kate's mother was in great anxiety. What to do now? Next rested her arms at her sides, walking over to the window. It happens so often with people that they think better as when the streetscapes appear before their eyes. She realized that by and large the girl's well-being was of interest only to her, and to some extent Anna, even though the alcohol had destroyed almost her entire personality. It was necessary to help this woman, and more importantly, to help Kate escape from trouble. The first thing that came to Wendy's mind was that the mysterious Miranda could harm the girl. Now it remained to figure out where to find this Miranda. No one knew where she lived. It was only known that it was somewhere nearby. Tim came out of his room. The boy looked out from behind him. He had probably just gotten out of bed and had absolutely no idea what the neighbor was doing here and why his mother was in such a state. "Hello, Aunt Wendy." "What's wrong?" "Mom," he looked questioningly at my mother. "Kate's missing." "Missing how?" "Well, she's an emergency." After saying that, Tim went to change his clothes. He must have thought that there might not be much time left, and then there was nothing to be done. So he decided to act at once. 2 minutes later, the boy came out into the living room. He looked at his father lying on the bed. He was in a state. The loud talking had almost woken him up. He realized that it was about his daughter, but he also realized that he didn't feel like getting up to go out, and his excuse to himself was that he wouldn't. Tim looked at his mom and Aunt Wendy. They were the only ones in the whole world who felt real concern for the girl. The boy spoke firmly, "We have to get out." In a minute, the three of them were outside and completely unsure of where to go. It was all her comrades. "I was told that she was picking on her," Anna lamented. "What kind of creature and about what?" asked the boy. "Yes, Miranda is a woman. She and Daria and Kate socialize in the yard." "What? What does she want with little children?" "Rascal bastard. I think I know who we're talking about. Me and the boys saw her the other day. She was going into a house with some kind of archway. I remember Tim." "Yes. There's a reason you're wrong everywhere." Tim, with a bitter smile full of worry, said his mother, "Let's go there quickly." In the last 10 minutes, Anna had managed to sober up completely. Her perpetually detached look had changed to a look full of centeredness and desire to find her daughter. It was a brief rebirth into a real mother, ready for the sake of her child to make any sacrifice. The three almost jogged to the very house where Miranda supposedly lived. Wendy and Anna knew an elderly woman from that driveway. Of course, she was already peacefully asleep at the time, but there was nothing to be done. A child's life was at stake. They called apartment number 5. "Adriana, open up, please. You're crazy. Perverts." You can see the voice of an older lady approaching the door. "Adriana, it's Wendy. Their daughter is missing." Wendy said impatiently. There was complete silence in the apartment. A moment later, there was a rustle and a heavy sigh from the landlady. She barely audibly muttered, "All right, I'll open the door while the children are here." The door was opened by a short, skinny woman of about 75. Her face was hollow with traces of former beauty. Her gray hair was rather short, but her evenly trimmed bangs, which adorned and ennobled her not young face, caught the eye. In appearance, she was good-natured and calm. "But I that my darlings, I did not see your daughter. I rarely go out." Adriana answered, "Do you know where Miranda lives? A woman in her 50s. She's been here a while. I think I asked her, but what is she? Is that what you're here for?" "I know, only she has nothing to do with it." "And you're a grandma. How do you know?" Anna started. The son hurried to calm down the nervous mother, who was on edge from the moment she learned about the disappearance of her daughter. "Mom, stop it. It's not about that. Miranda lives 1 floor above me, but you don't touch her. She's here to help me and feed the kitties on the street." Adriana wanted to say something else, but her uninvited guests were already hurrying up to the 3rd floor. Miranda opened the door almost immediately. "Good evening. What can I do for you?" Without a word, Anna, who stood in front of her, rudely pushed her into the corridor and walked briskly into the room. Miranda understood everything. She didn't resist or get in the way of these people. She understood. They had come looking for her favorite kitten. A few seconds later, Wendy and Tim entered as well. All 3 of them had been looking for the girl in Miranda's apartment, but saw that not only was she not here, but there was no sign of her. "I may ask what or who you are looking for in my apartment?" Miranda said, breaking the silence, the desperation of the girl's searchers. "We were looking for my sister Kate." "Sorry, we thought you had her." Tim replied sadly, "How did Kate disappear?" "Not that." The woman was surprised. "What do you know?" Wendy replied sharply. Her attitude towards Miranda was still prejudiced. "I've been in touch with the girl. She told me different stories. What did she tell you?" "You say we're going to lose her." Anna turned to the woman emotionally and with her hands on her head, slumped down on the blue couch that stood against the wall. Talking about some cars on sticks, she said she really wanted to go there but didn't know who to go with. Anna, Aunt Wendy, and Tim looked at each other. They all realized what kind of cars they were talking about. It was the local attraction near the Oriental Movie Theater. Almost running, they headed toward the place. "Wendy, I beg you, go home panting," asked the woman Anna. She saw that Wendy was in no condition to move so fast, and yet she was making attempts. "Yes, Auntie." "Wendy, we'll find it ourselves now." "Kate, we'll tell you everything at once." "All right, fuck it, I'll go. Don't wait up." An elderly woman of 67 years old slowly changed from running to walking and sat down on a bench near the living house. Only found alive, she thought. There was both fear and pain on her heart for this child, lost in every sense. Now there were 2 of them. The people closest to her were looking for Kate. They got to the rides that were about to close. "Have you seen a girl around here?" They approached the vacationers. Anna and her son began to describe her, but everyone was silent. Suddenly, someone from a noisy group of young people. She asked. "There was one." "We don't know." "There was a girl. Yours looked like they left about 5 minutes ago. She was with a man, like a man." Anna cried out. "Which way did they go?" "Over there to those 5-story buildings." The young man pointed to the gray paneled houses. Towering themselves among the other buildings, even more anxious mother and son ran towards the houses. They both knew. One of them had a dormitory run to this building. They rushed into the courtyard. Luckily, they saw Kate standing there with a suspicious man in his 30s. "You bastard. Get away from my baby." "I'll call the police, you bastard." Anna threw herself at the man and he ran away. "Where are your eyes going?" Tim was moving towards him, but the mother shouted, "Tim, stop. The boy's boy won't catch up anyway. Let the bastard run." At home, the unhappy Kate was waiting for a conversation with her mother, and already having smelled something wrong, conducted to her father. After half an hour of screaming at the girl, the parents left her and went to bed. The clock in the living room showed 13. The next day, Kate did not leave the house. Miranda was worried about her. She sat in the yard for a long time, and then when she saw Aunt Wendy come into the yard, she immediately rushed over to her. "Wendy, hello. I'm sorry, I'm very worried about Kate. What's wrong with her? Did you find her?" "Yeah, we found her all right." Wendy wasn't saying much. "And where is she?" "There's Daria playing alone again." "I don't know. What do you care about other people's little kids? Why are you talking to me like that? What right do you have?" Miranda was indignant. "I just don't understand why you want this girl. She is not your daughter, not your relative. You don't know her parents. What do you want?" "I know Kate. She's an 8-year-old girl. You're not her company. What do you want from her?" Miranda kept repeating the same question. But Miranda didn't want to take on the role of a defendant trying to prove her innocence. Her parents are alcoholics. They almost lost the girl. What if I hadn't been there? Wendy remained silent. She realized that there was truth in the woman's words. Miranda continued, "And I have grown to love this girl, and I worry about her. I see how hard it is for her. She doesn't even want to go home when it gets dark. You see all this and you say to yourself, they're other people's kids. You don't have to interfere, but I'm just talking to her. To you, her mother's drunken face and abusive father are the best thing for the girl. You're asking me what I want. What do you want? What do you want? Do you want me to stop talking to her? Would that make her life easier? I don't know. I sense danger in you. Kate just needs a friend. She needs someone who will listen to her and understand her. I never hurt her, but her own parents, they're monsters. They could be a danger to her, not her parents, not her mother. You have no right to discuss her. Why don't you take care of your own children?" Wendy decided to talk about it not because she did not understand the elementary rules of ethics when she became acquainted with a person. You should not bring up serious topics without knowing anything about his fate. No, she asked the question because she wanted to expose Miranda, to understand what motivated her to communicate with Kate. It's my private life. I don't have to answer to anyone. All I'm saying is that Kate's in danger. I want to do something to help her. Both women were left with their own opinions and feelings after the conversation. But Miranda was more right that day than ever. In fact, her words became prophetic. Kate did not leave the house, and the next morning and evening, no one had seen her for over a week since she had met a man on the street near the yard who was extremely dangerous to small children. She had met death itself, which she had managed to avoid thanks to a new friend named Miranda, Aunt Wendy, and her own mother and brother. But nothing good awaited the girl at home, and life had not changed for the better. In the morning, the father and mother were even angrier and more aggressive than at night. They had both sobered up. Anna told her husband about Kate's adventures in detail, and here was the intention to teach the daughter a lesson. These individuals did not want to think about the fact that their daughter was first of all a small, not thinking child who required attention, care, and most importantly, upbringing. They wanted to take out their anger and dissatisfaction with life on Kate. And that was that. Even the day before, having found herself in terrible trouble, having avoided it, the next day the girl got to the new parents, and having waited for the usual departure of the 14-year-old son from home beat the girl. Anna, of course, did not hit the child hard. She more shouted and controlled the actions of a scoundrel husband, who beat his own child with a belt and bare hands. After a while, the perverts realized that the girl had not risen from bed for a long time. On the pillow, they found traces of blood. Kate had to leave the hospital. She received serious beatings. The cruel parents worried not at all for her health. The girls, as much as for the fact that they would have to answer for their actions to the doctors, and maybe even to the court. Before going to the hospital, of course, they had to come up with some sort of legend to explain such severe injuries on the little girl's face and body. The doctors in the emergency room looked at each other. They weren't just looking at the child. The appearance of her parents made them realize the girl had been beaten by them. The young medic smiled at her colleague. It was, of course, a smile of irony. How many times had they encountered similar tales of a bad fall or a collision with a lamppost? Meanwhile, the nature of the injuries was obvious. It was a beautiful hot summer on July's cheerful, noisy days. Kate lay in a children's hospital on her bunk and looked out the window, dreaming of getting out of those gloomy, unpleasant four walls sooner. The only thing she was grateful for about this place was the temporary protection from her hated relatives. She missed her friend Daria, the other neighborhood children. Despite not having much contact with them, Kate was already starting to reminisce about school. She wanted to go to third grade. She also thought of her adult friend Miranda and wondered if she would be worried about her absence. She really cared about this stranger's feelings. She was no longer such a stranger to her. On the contrary, there was something native in her voice and in her smile. In spite of all the care the doctors had taken of little Kate at the time of her discharge, she was almost healthy, but she was not able to regain her original aesthetic appearance. Still on her face were bruises of the mortgage. But the girl did not worry about it. After all, ahead was a meeting with her dear and close people. After the home-beating Kate began to appreciate the friendship with Daria and Miranda even more. She walked out into the courtyard. All eyes that day were directed toward her, and even though Kate was a little girl, everyone could feel her bruises and looked at her with special attention and interest. "Hi," a friend hurried to hug the girl. "Hi, Daria, I missed you." "Oh, what's wrong with you?" "Did someone beat you up?" "I fell." "You fell really hard." Yeah, Aunt Miranda asked about you a lot. She was worried." "I know she was. That's okay. I'll see you soon." Daria asked about the details of the fall for a long time, of course, not realizing that she was hurting her friend and that she was being as inept and childish as she could, twisting and making up stories. So uncomfortable and hurtful. Kate hadn't been in a long time. She caught herself in a complicated and unchildlike thought. I already have to lie to hide all these nightmares from others. And with that, she firmly decided, I don't want to lie like this for the rest of my life. But as usual, she didn't know what to do to make her life, which was still just beginning, change for the better. Miranda was not in the yard that day. This circumstance upset Kate. Still, she was glad to be back in such a familiar and native place as the courtyard. At the same time, at the sight of the entryway of her own house, she grew gloomy and depressed. Even her feet were showing. And with all her body and soul, she wanted to stay away from that place. When she was left in the yard, as always, almost the last one to arrive, she made her way to the entrance. She felt bad thoughts overpowering her. There was panic. Each step was given to the girl with heaviness. It was as if more and more shackles were being shackled to her feet. She stood by the front door for about 5 minutes and pondered. I don't want to go there. I really don't. I'd rather live on the street or at Aunt Miranda's. I don't want to live with them. I hate them. Why isn't Aunt Miranda my mom? It would be better for everyone. For the first time, a thought occurred to the girl. It was so strange and yet logical. To live with Aunt Miranda. She did not want to impose on anyone and realized that her thought would not turn into reality. Meanwhile, tired, long ago lonely, and unhappy doctor-gynecologist counseling pregnant and planned pregnancy women. Lying in her dark room on a soft couch, she stared up at a black dot on the ceiling. Her eyes were so focused, as if she was contemplating her future life in that dot. In fact, she was. She liked to think, dream, fantasize. On a weekday after work. And as a rule, everyone had her even well mapped out. The available thoughts ended with painful digging herself and reminiscing about the mistakes of the past years. So she started with a vague future and ended with a heavy past, which now and then pressed an incomprehensible weight on her. Now, it was true, her habitual thoughts were often supplanted by thoughts of little but very brightness. Youngsters from the sun named Kate. She was alarmed at the sudden disappearance of the girl. Still, she was always glad to think of her and the innocent nonsense she loved so much. Their meeting took place almost 2 weeks after the next time they saw each other. Miranda, meeting the girl near their favorite shop, was both pleased and chagrined. But she did not question her about anything. Kate, as usual, started talking about her love of butterflies, about the bright star she had seen the day before in the sky about classmates, and about how she wanted to go to school and was thinking about how difficult it would be for her in third grade. Miranda, like the girl herself, acted like her little one's face. Her friends didn't change, even though it was difficult for her mentally. As Kate told her her next stories, she had conjectures, conclusions, and possible solutions. It was them. It was her inadequate parents. Swirling around in her mind were angry women. Only it was just like Kate's. She had no way out of this terrible situation, in which an innocent child suffered and had long since chosen the streets of the neighborhood, in which dysfunction and danger reigned supreme. Always those girls snooping around. The locals were talking about Kate and Dasha. They didn't like it, and they understood the reasons for the girls' new wanderings on the street. But no one wanted or saw any point in doing anything to help them. And why should they? The kids had parents. And that meant that everything that could happen to the children was only on their conscience. What's fair then? The first person who really took an interest in Kate's plight was Miranda. She was lonely. Not long ago, her husband had left the woman. They'd been married for 20 years. It was a difficult decision for the two of them, especially Miranda. She loved Will. She gave him all the comforts of home, warmth, love, care. But most importantly, since some time for Will was to hear, finally, the cries of the baby, though beautifully furnished, but so quiet apartment. Miranda was 52. The last few years had been the most active for her in terms of having a baby. She had convinced herself and her husband that everything would work out, even though she was at such an inappropriate age for childbearing. A year ago, William turned 51. Do you realize it's a shame to have a baby at this age? What? Ashamed. Miranda quietly, timidly, and at the same time with a slight note of complaint turned to her husband. So you're ashamed of me? Miranda, you're not. I'm just tired already. Of what? I'm 47. You're 51. We should just calm down, you know. All I know is that we can't give up. All the money that's been spent on this. Exactly, William said. What's the point? It's no use. This conversation was especially bitter for the women. They had been married for so many years. And now, after the hurtful words, the union had a good chance of falling apart after many years. William also worked in midwifery, and lately it had become hard for him to do this important business of delivering women. After all, his beloved had never given him a child. The decision to leave Miranda was not easy for him, but he did not make it overnight. William simply postponed it for another year. He loved her, but her prolonged and hopeless infertility sometimes frustrated him to such an extent that the only solution he saw was separation. Will felt himself growing colder to his wife, to her problems, to her successes, and even her joy when she smiled and laughed. All he did was squeeze a smile out of himself. 52-year-old gynecologist Miranda Feedy. Of course, she saw Lyubimov's changes, but she didn't want to accept them. She let him go with the thoughts that he, like her, was tired of being devastated. At first, Miranda supported the former spouse, calling him and inquiring about his health mood. But things changed. In a moment, she learned that her native beloved William will marry for the second time, and the chosen one was a young girl, a nurse named Kelly. Miranda knew her, and I knew her. They often saw each other at the order of authorship. The girl was sweet and modest. She was pretty, but she was immature, felt nothing for her but reveled in her youth. She had no idea that a certain nonverbal relationship had already developed between them, that little by little was destroying her already shaky marriage. Miranda later learned that Kelly was pregnant. She made a difficult decision for herself that day. She moved out of the neighborhood where she and Vidya had met and lived, where she had worked for over 10 years, and had been calling for a private perinatal clinic for a long time. And she, as if sensing that one day these people would be useful to her, did not refuse them, citing the impossibility of getting a job with them due to various difficulties. Miranda began to breathe hard again, and again stumbling over her ex-husband's personal life information. It became unbearable. William tried to avoid her so as not to hurt her feelings, but they worked in the same place. This meant that meetings, though rare, were inevitable. She moved to a disadvantaged neighborhood, but living there was geographically convenient for the weekday commute. Here she saw for the first time this little girl, who touched the most delicate strings of her soul. The thought of children never faded in her mind. She still wished to have a child and even planned to go to an orphanage. But the acquaintance and further nice, kind conversations with Kate all had postponed that trip. She was already interested. There were other children. For her, as for other real moms, they were strangers' children. One had so imperceptibly and quickly become her own. Another already less tense conversation with Wendy seemed to gather all Miranda's thoughts into one decision. She didn't understand what she had heard from her neighbor, but she felt that she understood everything. Again you asked the approaching Miranda, holding the bags in her hands. Me again. You know I live nearby. Maybe I'm not allowed to sit in the neighbor's yard now. You start acting like you want to. Just as weird as I am. All right, that's enough of that. Where do you go grocery shopping? You live online, and we all go to a 10 instead of a meeting. Well, I can go there too, she answered indifferently. Clearly, she was thinking about something else. I was not very concentrated on the conversation. There was silence between the women. A light summer breeze ruffled the blonde strands of hair that came out from under Marina's crap. She looked away toward the noisy roadway. Miranda, are you married? I'm not. And children? Miranda didn't answer. Wendy didn't bother asking her. She suddenly thought of her family of gays. And these alcoholics are our two children. Tim and Kate is your favorite, but she herself is an orphanage. Miranda asked thoughtfully, what a wedding we had here. We partied all night. They went to a restaurant. It was such a PR, I don't know where he found her. And then the bottle. And that was it. There's a lot of people like that around here. It's just the most scandalous ones. Miranda eagerly caught every word from Aunt Wendy, looking for salvation and a way out of the situation. And when she got home with bags full of food and lay down on her blue couch, she began to have intrusive thoughts. Not an alcoholic. The orphanage, so Kate doesn't know her grandmother. So what? Why are you telling yourself all this? No, what's the big deal? It's August. The kids were starting to feel a little bit more like school was approaching. Some were anxious, some were excited. And there were those who were especially pragmatic, who thought that it would be good to use the last summer money to the fullest, without thinking about the future. But as it got significantly colder outside, neighbors smoking on the balcony was no longer observed. In the yard, such a noisy, large crowd of children became noticeably quieter and calmer. It was a quiet, calm, and cool day. Kate went outside in a light pale green jacket. Daria was not in the street. She was walking alone, daydreaming about something, and occasionally daring to step into a sprint. Her mind was whirling merrily, swapping one for another. Childish, funny, ridiculous, and just plain fun thoughts. Miranda came later. She called out to the girl. Kate, hi. How are you doing? Miranda, hi. I'm good. How are you? She walked over to her friend and saw that she looked puzzled about something. Miranda had been really thoughtful since morning and afternoon at work. And now that she'd met Kate. Miranda, you look sad, the kids said. I was just thinking, my good ones. About what? About you, Kate. I think about you a lot now about me. What's there to think about me about? After a moment, the woman said uncertainly, how are you like me? Yes. Do you like star butterflies too? The girl smiled. No, my girl. You and I are alike in more ways than just that. You're my kin. Kate didn't understand what Miranda was getting at. Miranda was silent. She was uncomfortable with something she had already considered several times, something that had been long ago decided by her. Now it was so hard to voice to this trusting little angel. So reluctant to deceive her. I am your grandmother. Quietly, she said. But it can't be loud. Having said these words, the girl took a deep breath and covered her mouth with her palms. I don't have a grandmother. I don't have a mom. She's from the orphanage. I know, Kate, your mom was taken away from me a long time ago. And now I found you, Tim. You have your daughter. Your mom upset me. I don't want to know anything about her. She's hurting you. So Mom doesn't know about you, but you know everything now. Miranda wanted to make one very important, unexpected suggestion to the girl, but restrained herself, thinking that today she had enough information, which was not only shocking, but also false. This woman had suffered much in her life. It was a long time for him, in spite of his efforts and righteous living, to face the fact that she could not once again have a child. A small and sharp blow was the betrayal of her husband. Of course, all these events had affected Miranda, and she was no longer the same. The moral boundaries within her were erased. It seemed that she was ready for the most any stupid, rash, and terrible step. She thought long and hard about the neglected blue-eyed girl named Kate. And finally, she had made up her mind. She was going to steal her away from her family. Miranda was at the stage of thinking out her course of action. She had no margin for error. A mistake meant a complete failure in life, closing the last door to at least this late personal happiness. That in her case meant imprisonment. Miranda realized if she was caught, she would not survive the shame and imprisonment. Careful and cautious, the dweller of the house with the arch was not only watching Kate. She already knew quite a bit about her parents, her brother, those who might have caused the threat. One of them was Aunt Wendy. Miranda learned that the grief her parents had found as of late had been in a terrible drunkenness and had seen and understood little of the world. Those we came home less and less often. Rumors that Anna and Jacob were in an inadequate state spread from bench to bench, from yard to yard, with the speed of the first August leaves falling to the ground. Everyone knew the couple hadn't left the house in weeks, unless it was to replenish their supply of alcohol, which at the time was vital to them. The day of the false confession, Miranda was still a little doubtful about the correctness of her action and further plans. She sat at home in the semi-darkness and pondered. But for each of her inner questions, she found the answer that was the justification she so desperately needed. That night, she was like Raskolnikov, dividing people into the creature or the entitled. Miranda wondered to herself, why am I afraid to put the girl out of her misery? Does she really have the right to have and raise children? Where is the justice? As time went on, the questions became fewer, and in their place were now mostly statements that Miranda, of course, thought were correct. Alcoholics aren't human. Kate has a right to be happy, and I will make her happy. Why have I been tormented all my life? Why is it fate that I don't have children? I've done everything for this. Will I not be rewarded for it and have an outlet? Miranda interrupted her heavy meditations, crying. She became unbearable, sad and afraid. She feared for herself in case of failure. She feared for the girl in case something inside her did flinch, and she put it like that. But she lost her tears and looked at the homemade bracelets made of small, colorful glass balls that Kate had given her the day before. I'm still going to save this girl by all means. They met again. Kate knew where her adult friend lived, and Miranda invited her over. It was early weekend morning, about 8 o'clock or a little earlier. That way the risk of being seen by the locals was reduced many times over. Miranda was afraid that Kate would not want to go far away for a long time and with a stranger from her family. She loved Tema, though she rarely saw her. She loved the place she lived in. She also loved the school and the teachers. Thoughts of the girl's possible disagreement were now perhaps the only obstacle to her goal. Miranda looked at Kate seagully, hers practically gone. The girl had been surprisingly cheerful and alert that day, but that she didn't tell anyone anything like I asked Kate to. What's wrong with you? No? In a whisper, Kate said. Kate, I have a serious conversation to have with you. Just please think yourself well. The girl looked intently at Miranda. Kate, I want us to go away, go to my place. This place outside the city forever. Asked the girl. She was even more surprised and confused than when she had heard that the mysterious woman turned out to be a grandmother. This question was one of those that Miranda had not thought through at all. What was the best answer? To lie again or to tell it like it was? She didn't want to lie to the girl again after that big deception, but her reaction scared her. Kate was terrified, and in her eyes she could read it. A sudden sadness came over her. She was a child after all, and her parents, no matter how they sometimes showed themselves, were her family. And most importantly, she loved her brother Tim. Not for a year, or maybe 2, I want to, and then we'll come over. What will Mom and Dad say? I mean, they'll fight. I've talked it over with them. Unfortunately, there's no time for goodbyes. If we don't leave, we'll never leave now. A decision. The girl laughed for a long time and looked at the floor. Occasionally, she glanced at Miranda, and the latter just stared at the unfortunate child whose life could change abruptly in a moment. And what was wildest of all, she had to decide her fate here and now. Okay, we'll go, I've decided. Miranda exhaled deeply and trying to hide her extreme satisfaction from the psychological work done. The woman already had everything ready. Clothes, warm summer shoes, hygiene products, books, skew to the road. All this fit into a dense bag and a large backpack. Miranda did not want to attract unnecessary attention with a big bulky suitcase. Her task was to leave the city limits with her child as discreetly as possible. They boarded a bus first, then another, then a third. That too was part of the precaution. But on the bus, there was no need to show identification. After all, it was dangerous to leave any traces in the form of information about themselves. Miranda had distant relatives she had visited when she was young. It was a village far from the city. Not abandoned, but dying out. Mostly old people lived there. And life there had a slower and more measured pace. No one quarreled, no one fought. People went about their daily lives and went to the store 5 kilometers away. They talked to each other on the benches. And sometimes they just admired the view from the window. They watched the birds of the sunset from the branches of the trees. If someone was in the habit of coming here every 10 years, that person would not notice that something was changing. Even the villagers appeared the same. After decades, there was a magic to this place. The townspeople called the village by the humble name of Bull's Bermuda Triangle. Kate, to the delight of her new grandmother, had been like a child in her first days in the village, neither picky nor fussy. The environment was calm and quiet, but it was quite difficult for an 8-year-old girl to change her routine. Miranda drew water for the 2 of them from a well. Washing had to be done in a narrow wooden house with a wooden floor. On a stand lay an old mill. There was a bar of white soap stuck to it, which had already turned to stone, making it impossible to wash properly. Fortunately, Miranda had all the necessary hygiene products with her. She loved wood to heat the house. It was a most amusing sight for urban Kate. She'd seen wood chopping, of course, but only on TV. And they were all strong, sturdy men. And here the grandmother herself was engaged in such unladylike labor. After a couple of days of living in the cabin, which was, by the way, despite all the inconveniences, quite cozy for living in it, Miranda and Kate had a conversation. The woman wanted to secure herself and her once more from the people who would certainly be looking for them. Glasses of delicious trophy tea were left on the table. Kate returned to the house after a hike to a nearby grove. But what found mushrooms only one girl sadly showed her grandmother. Do not worry, come fall. We'll go with you to the forest full of them to pick them. Kate sat down at the table. She took a glass in her hands and began to give up steam, going to the hot trophy tea, inhaling with her nostrils. His beautiful forest scent. Miranda looked at the girl and thought about the fact that she was still in danger. What if people came? What if word of the girl's disappearance was already going around the country? She remembered that look of instant sobering and a mother ready to kill her Kate when she came to her in that one. What was she capable of? She didn't know. One had to be reassured. No matter how calm and detached the inhabitants were, anything could happen. Kate, I have something to ask you, Miranda said shyly. Kate had already drunk tea and started on the cookies. Uh-huh, the girl replied nonchalantly. You could call me Mom. Kate could not answer this question immediately. A week ago, the person sitting across from her was just Miranda. A few days ago, her own grandmother, and now she was asking for something more difficult for a young child to understand. I know it's difficult, but it's necessary. But I have a mom. Miranda did not coax the girl. She decided that she herself would indirectly encourage Kate to do so. Now she addressed her not only as Kate, but also as daughter. She looked quite young for her 52 years and afterward. Kate, it was so wild for me one day to still address her as Mom. Kate's appearance also underwent a change. Long hair going all the way down to her elbows. Hers was now short and the ends barely touched her shoulders. Meanwhile, while Kate and Miranda, drinking tea in the village cottage, heated by the seal of the couple, and only noticed that the daughter disappeared from the house and did not appear for more than 3 days. To make such a conclusion, they were helped by Tim. The boy, too, had been leaning here and there with his friends all this time. And it so happened that he just ran from the hallway to his room or slept there, and also quickly removed in the morning to the street. The boy was exposed to the influence of drinking company. There were 16-year-olds among them, and they all knew about beer, vodka, and cognacs firsthand. Tim got bored, just hanging around the streets of the neighborhood, so he joined the older guys. Now his summer everyday life consisted of fun drinking with grown-up guys and girls, mopeds, and alcohol. Theme: all these 3 days felt something wrong, but could not understand what was wrong. She was living her own life, where there was almost no room for family. And although he loved Kate, but for a while he forgot about her that day when he decided to relax at home longer and play an online game with friends. The older brother remembered that his little sister didn't annoy him like before, didn't ask him about anything, and didn't ask to sit at the computer. He didn't see her in the yard when he came home. Tim went into his parents' room. They were both in the mid-afternoon state. Mom, Dad, where's Kate? Anna got up on the bed and held out her palm from behind the back of her eye. Kate. Jacob. Jacob, have you seen Kate today? The man, awake, still didn't understand what the housemates wanted him to do. Kate, gone. Don't you understand? His wife yelled at him. What do you mean she's gone? She's not missing. She's walking around the yards. From despair and indifference, Jacob, she slowly sank into the chair and grabbed her head with her hands. What a nightmare. Kate, she cried for the first time for her daughter, rather than risk never seeing the girl again, and something told her that now there would be no happy ending. Just as it had been when they had searched for Kate with Tim and Wendy. The day they realized Kate was missing, the neighborhood police were called in. And the very next day, the whole town was looking for the little girl. On almost every post and on every bulletin board in the city hung the black and white portrait of Kate, a beautiful, blue-eyed girl with a kind smile and gorgeous, long, blonde mustache hair. The case of missing 8-year-old Kate quickly spread across the country. Every region was involved in the search for the missing girl to a greater or lesser extent. Of course, when visiting the police station, they never forgot to mention a certain Miranda, who had lived in a neighboring house for some time and was friends with Kate. She's the one who stole the girl. I know for sure we should look for her, said the desperate women. But it turned out that Miranda was living in the apartment illegally, and no documents were provided to the landlord. A second case arose, and the police took up the search for the owner of the apartment. All these problems were even more waiting to get on the trail of the kidnapper. It turned out that no one could say anything about this woman. Especially the police did not want to develop a man who was not seen for anything criminal, except for socializing with a little girl. It wasn't clear to anyone, including the investigators. They sat in a small stuffy office with old furniture and already retired from modern technology computer, turning on everything once in a while and discussed cases. There were 2 of them, a young investigator, Andrew, and a senior police lieutenant, Michael. But that's what it wants from us, angry as a cattle. It's her own fault that the girl is missing. But you can see from her face that she was beating her. Come on, Michael. We got a kid to find. Who we got in the pipeline? No one. You remember what that broad said about that sketchy janitor who left with the girl? I think that's him. And Miranda is some kind of fairy tale creature. Basically, if we work hard enough, we'll find her. We can do a sketch based on the mother's description, canvass the neighborhood. Andrew, let's not do that yet. We'll look for this asshole for now. And the aunt is for just talking to the little one now. Do we have to bring everybody up? It seems to me that after these 2 words, Andrew became silent, which could have cost him the revelations that he was suddenly so eager to express. What do you think? It seems to me that if they were looking for the daughter of some local oligarch, they'd find Miranda, this one and anyone else. Andrew's still young. Senior Lieutenant Michael's conclusion was completely inappropriate and ill-considered. It carried no hidden meaning except that Andrew was really physiologically young. With such phrases, the chief subdued the ardor of energetic employees who, as he believed, had not yet known real life. So the investigators agreed that Miranda should be excluded from the suspects, especially since the investigation had no information about her. Miranda. Having been alive for a month now, Kate never lost her guard. When she came to town for a necessary occupation, she came across a photograph with a familiar face on one of the lampposts. It was Kate. The woman became uneasy. She found the nearest bench and sat on it. But here I am, a criminal. I've stolen someone else's child. But how unfair is life? Miranda in general lately more and more agreed with that inner self, which once pushed her to deceive Kate, and later to kidnap her. She played the role of savior, sincerely not understanding and not accepting the outside world and people around. All people seemed to her not decent, evil, and worthy only of punishment and retribution. And she also fell in love with the word fate. Everything that happened to her and her Kate, she called this word. But none of it was a dialogue with her friends or coworkers. It was a dialogue with herself. Talking to Miranda was not something she was afraid to do with anyone. Getting unnecessarily caught up with people in whom she saw only hostility. The town Miranda traveled to was small. The local police knew about the village, but they did not disturb this small world cut off from civilization. We won't stick anything in the village. There is nothing there to scare the locals with all sorts of passions, the head of the department told her charges. 3 months passed. The cold November has come. Nature had seemed to rise one day after a long wait and reward all living things with the sharp colors and fragrant smells of spring. Tim was on his way back from school. He was no longer part of the company of those murderous boys. Interacting with them had fatally, he believed, affected his life and the lives of his family. He walked down the dark corners of the streets, and his heart could not, with the pain of the darkness, remembered his sister again. How little time I spent with her. I should have been watching her and helping her. I hate you. The boy had never been fond of his parents. But now he would come home to lock himself in his room until morning and head off to school again. A strange feeling attended the boys. It was as if Kate had ceased to exist for him. He still hoped that she would show up one day, but that hope was fading with each passing day. He walked into the hallway. The apartment was quiet. Street concerts, squabbles, and shouts carried from the neighboring courtyard. It had been a long time since the neighbors had been heard. And in general, they were less and less mentioned by the locals. Only the grandmothers, when they saw the gloomy Anna walking towards the wine store, murmured among themselves, discussing the woman's hard fate. What a pity for her, they said. Only Wendy did not consider this character a victim. She was the only one who seemed to know something and was never embarrassed at the sight of Kate's mother walking down the street. While the child was being searched for all over the city and people around her were discussing this horrifying event, she was calm. The subject, as you a muffled voice, came from the kitchen. It was Mom. Tim didn't answer anything and headed towards his room. Tim called out to his mother even more quietly. The boy reluctantly walked into the kitchen. He saw a pathetic creature that very roughly resembled a woman. Anna's face had grown coarser and was covered with numerous wrinkles and puffy. Her hair, as usual, had an unwashed and unkept look. She smelled like she hadn't showered in a week. Maybe she hadn't. I haven't heard anything, nothing new. Do you think she'll be back? I don't know, exhaled the subject to the press. Tim sat down opposite. There was an ashtray on the table. One of the bowls was also downing his only cigarette. The boy saw a tear on his mother's cheek. She rested her fist, and her forehead and sobs looked at the floor. The picture is my daughter. The subject was in a state of stupor. He pitied his mother, but the feeling did not leave him. The boy realized that all these tears and worries were the payment for leaving them once, leaving the one who needed them all. Even though he saw in his mother a kind of rebirth, it had even pleasantly surprised him at one point. But the thought of Kate being gone, with them, brought him back to a harsh reality where there was no room for any positivity. Still, he instinctively got up from his chair and walked over to Tim's mother, put his arms around her, and whispered, "It's not your fault. Don't torture yourself. I love you." November replaced December, and later winter replaced spring. It was especially painful for Kate's family to spend time in the backyard of the house, the very noisy realm of children where Kate loved to spend time. Both Tim and his parents. After several times visiting the palace, they decided not to go there anymore and began to avoid the place. But time moved inexorably on, turning fresh wounds into scars and fresh memories into emptiness. Kate grew up and well. When she turned 15, it wasn't enough to have her mother's books and an old TV with 2 channels. The girl had no friends and no phone. She was a real schoolgirl. And if her mother wasn't around, she would go feral. Miranda became sick more often. The woman was 61 years old. Her only help and doctor was her daughter Kate. She left inside her this fear for her beloved and only being on Earth, and in 7 years never made friends or even acquaintances. And if Kate was enough for her and replaced her friend, companion, assistant, and psychologist, the young, beautiful girl was just hungry for new acquaintances and a new, modern, comfortable life. Miranda let her go to town more and more often, but asked her to be quiet, cautious, and not to contact anyone. The girl spent her time at the movies, in cafes, and shopping malls. Fortunately, her mother was able to give her money for such entertainment, who threw quite a decent amount of money on her account every month. And she also wrote scientific papers and articles to order. One day it all happened. Kate made a friend, a guy named Alex. He was urban and a little older than her. Kate told her mother that she was going for a walk around the city alone, but she was in the company of a nice young man. When Alex found out that her friend didn't have a phone, he briefly bought her one as a gift as a token of friendship. When the mother found out such careless purchases, she became displeased, almost escalating into rage. "Kate, we agreed no cell phones." She was indignant. "But I'm an adult. Look, I have a different outlook on life. And what are yours? Tell me," Miranda asked in a mocking tone. "I think you can't hide from people. I don't understand why we've been doing this for so many years. I've explained it to you. We are being chased by people, dangerous people." By the way, Miranda had said a lot of things to Kate in those 7 years. A lot of things, often things that had nothing to do with reality. Once you deceive someone, it's easier to deceive them again. So there's a whole chain of lies being built up. Before Miranda knew it, this style of communicating with her daughter had become habitual. Here Kate, too, became dishonest and mature with her. She asked herself questions to which she could not find answers. And slowly it became clear to her. Miranda had been deceiving her for a long time. Lately, the girl had even become annoyed by her excessive concern for her. Constant warnings and advice that sounded like orders. Phrases, "I'm worried about you. You're my only family, and I wish you nothing but good things." Being always comforting, we kindly began to push her away. Dangerous people. What kind of people are these? Maybe you mean your daughter? Which daughter? Miranda, upon asking Kate about it, immediately realized that Kate meant her alcoholic mother. And she was quick to correct herself. "Anna, I was starting to forget that she was my daughter." This conversation had been on her mind for a long time. She did not understand how you could love your granddaughter and forget that you have a daughter. She now had even more distrust for the man she was living with. This whole picture of life was no longer comfortable and familiar to her. Kate, like a bird, wanted to jump out of this not at all golden cage and smell somewhere far away. More and more often she imagined her father, her brother, and her mother. Kate missed them. Kate began to see Alex more and more often. She was also taking English classes now, and she was both scared and pleased to finally feel socialized, where there were people her age, young female students, college students, and professors everywhere, who were all educated, interesting individuals. She finally had the opportunity to socialize and came to this decision on her own. Kate was cramped in a village where the most interesting entertainment was watching an old TV with 2 barely working channels. They met after the course and went outside to the park. They were out in the springtime. Beautiful people were watching the most lush blooming of nature. It was the beginning of May. Alex had heard some things about Miranda already and didn't always understand his and Kate's relationship. He was interested in his girlfriend's life and one day decided to have a serious conversation with her. "Kate, I got that right. She's not your birth mother. She's my grandmother. She once asked me to call her mom. I did. Don't you miss yours? I do. But if I leave too, she can't stand it. She once said if I left, I shouldn't come back. Kate, it's all manipulation. You have to realize that. What does that mean?" Kate read science fiction, of course, but the versatility of her communication was sometimes lacking. She didn't know many modern phrases, fashion trends. Alex was a savior for her in this world. Everything that seemed strange to the girl. For example, when watching a movie, she would check with her friend. "That means, Kate, she controls your emotions. She knows you feel sorry for her and pressures you to do so." "Yes, that's true. But what do we do?" "Do you want to see your family? I want to see my brother." "I don't know if I want to see the people who ruined my childhood." "Grandma, she saved me from them." "But she stole you." This sudden conclusion Alex kind of shook Kate's mind. She thought for the first time that Miranda's act could, in fact, be considered kidnapping. "Stolen, but she said it was best for me. I was beaten, Alex. They drank. They were never interested. I understand. But you understand, too. She had no right to do that to these people." Kate that day was the first time she thought so deeply about the possible feelings of her first family. What if they're still hurting? What if they're looking for me? What if Grandma hadn't discussed anything with them? Alex's words were now unsettling, and it seemed he was right. Kate was determined to get her way. But how to make sure that her grandmother, to whom she owed a lot, would not be offended? One beautiful May evening, they had a conversation. Did Kate spend a long time going round and round? Yes, around, talking about how much she would like to see her brother Tim, but saw that her grandmother was not very willing to talk about relatives. "I've been meaning to ask you for a long time. Why didn't you take the subject with us? He's your grandson, too. He was a big boy. He wouldn't have gone. I talked to him. He made his decision. But why would you want to take away my ability to communicate with him?" "Kate, this is hard for me to talk about." Miranda realized that Kate was backing her into a corner with this kind of questioning. What was she to say about a teenage boy she had only seen a couple times? The woman's lies were amplified. The girl's curiosity grew more and more sophisticated. "I want to go to them. I'll go decisively." Kate cut Kate off. "No, that's not even up for discussion. You and I have talked about it. Won't you take me back? If I come, are you going to kick me out?" "No, no, no, no," emotionally shouted the woman. After a moment of calming down and catching her breath, she answered much quieter than before, as if to close the subject of all the girls' long-standing requests and complaints. "They're dead, all of them." That it couldn't be. Kate didn't get up from her chair, but it is. Miranda, sitting on the chair in front of the dining table, rested her face in the palms of her hands. She wasn't crying, she wasn't hiding her tears, as people who want their emotions not to be seen by those around them usually do. She was hiding the absence of tears. She was hiding the shame of another lie. Another 10 years passed. Kate was 25. At this age, she had to experience another of the most bitter losses of her life. Her own beloved grandmother had died, though she was personally surrounded by more and more secrets with each passing year. Kate loved her sometimes strange, sometimes cruel, but very loving and caring grandmother Miranda. By this time, the girl had already had a serious relationship with Alexei, the very guy who often spurred her to assert her rights in communication with her grandmother. As cynical as it may sound, but only after the death of Miranda, Kate decided to take the step that her beloved had been waiting for her for 5 whole years. She told him yes, and it was 2 days after the funeral. Miranda, still towards the end of her life, accepted Alex, because she realized the girl would need care and support. After all, except for her real grandmother and a young man, she had no one in this world. At least she convinced her of that. Kate, coming to the native cozy little house where she grew up and comprehended life through books. Communicating with her grandmother Miranda was happy and sad. She realized I was entering a new life, but something seemed to put her down. And it wasn't just the death of a dear and close person. Kate felt that the death of her grandmother did not close all her spiritual worries and eternal state of anxiety. Her heart was still out of place. Both mind and body had been calling to Kate always since the day of Miranda's death. And here she was, surrounded by objects and furniture that had once been so familiar to her. She had learned the roughness in the holes and birthmarks of each. Strangely, the girl caught herself thinking that she had never laid or even sat on her grandmother's bed. She slowly walked over to it and sat down on it. That dark green bedspread that her grandmother used to cover her bed with. That red patterned rug that always gave the house a special atmosphere and coziness so cheerful in the apartment. Those intricate figures on the carpet always brought the girl back to the past. Kate threw her head back and cried. She was to be married soon, but for some reason doubts were creeping into her soul. The girl didn't want to start a new page of life, not having sorted out the old ones yet. A lot of questions hung in her soul. What happened to her relatives? Why had her grandmother taken her so far away? And why was she only worried about her? By the way, wanted answers to all these questions. And those answers came. When she calmed down and wiped her tears away with her hand, she turned to the wall and saw something white between us. It was deeply hidden, and yet, as if on purpose, part of it was peeking through the gap. Kate tried to get it out, but failed. Then she found a pair of scissors in her grandmother's old jewelry box. The name she grasped the edge and pulled out the whole thing. It was a piece of paper folded in four. Having discovered an interesting find, the girl hurried with it to the light. She sat down by the window and unfolded the sheet. Kate immediately recognized the familiar handwriting. It was Miranda's grandmother's. Her hands were covered with cold, sweat, and even trembled slightly. She didn't know the contents of the letter, of course, and couldn't even guess what it would say. But for some reason, she felt that her life would change drastically after reading it. Kate read the following lines. Dear Kate, you know and see how sick I am. Every day could be my last. I try to see you more often, to see your smile and how happy you are. Yes, I want to tell you again, taking your Alex, there is so much I want to tell you right now, but unfortunately I am pathetic and cowardly. I only ask you for one thing. Let this be my last will and testament. Not, cursing me for what I'm about to tell you now. I'm not your grandmother, I'm not your mother, I'm nothing to you. But I loved you very much when I saw you on the playground. You were an angel to me then, and I'm an unhappy man. An unhappy woman who met betrayal, deceit, and pain along the way. I could never have children. The man I loved left me, and he and I lived together for 20 years. You appeared to me just at the moment when the darkness in my soul closed everything alive. I'm grateful for that, but I've been lying to you all this time. I saw how worried you were about your family. I know who left you with those bruises on your face and your body, and I so didn't want them to do it again. My heart is breaking with pain. I'm a liar. I stole you, I kidnapped you. They were looking for you. They were all looking for you, Kate. I know that. But the scariest, most important thing I lied about is that your brother, your mother and father, they're alive. Yes, they're alive. They're still living in Chicago. If you've forgiven them, and go there soon. Being a mother is the greatest value in life. I've experienced it because of you. Kate sat on the bed for a few minutes in a state of complete stupor. She didn't believe the words that were written on the piece of paper. She didn't want to believe that her grandmother had cruelly deceived her all these years. And at the same time, it was as if she had learned what she had longed to know, and all the secrets that had kept her in suspense were revealed. She, in general, got what she wanted, and now she was ready, probably to burn this message and erase in herself all memory to kill all desire to know the truth. The girl did not cry, which seemed strange to her. She tried to squeeze a single tear out of herself, but failed. Now her mind was dominated by the thought of going to her relatives. 3 days after the bitter discovery and the gap between the betrayed walls, she finally made up her mind. Kate had packed her backpack, had already written Alex a message. Alex, my family is alive. I'm going away. I'll be there in a few days or weeks. I'll explain everything. I'll tell you later. Kate sat at the small table in the kitchen where she had once had tea with her grandmother. She had decided that for the rest of her life, Miranda would be remembered as her own person. The resentment toward her lasted for a few hours, and later all that remained was pity. She took a seat on the path where things were already waiting for her in the hallway. The girl looked out the unwashed window at the courtyard. It would seem that she had waited so long for this moment. She had despaired so much when she learned of the death of her loved ones, and even regretted holding blackness in her heart for her mother and father. She had been so uplifted when she realized they were all alive, but something seemed to stop her from making this trip. It was hard for her to say, too. There's nothing you can do about it. When feelings bloom inside you, bad or good but they're all so ingrained in your head that every day, from waking up to falling asleep, you hear them, feel them, live with them, and a similar strong feeling came over Kate. She couldn't figure out what it was, fear or resentment or rejection. But it was strong behind the sea of energy, of feeling. She thought, whatever the deception was, everything that happened to me, from the moment I was kidnapped and moved away, led me to what is happening to me today. She was happy with Alex. Her soul and mind remained pure and not corrupted from city life. She looked at her watch. She had already missed the first bus of its kind.